Yeah, we got somebody over there that's.
Casey, why is Joey in the hospital?
By what?
Why is Joey in the hospital?
EC zone.
He was
In a coastal construction.
It went up, they had to slice his whole arm open to clean out the tissue. The doctor up there said that bacteria in the water in that part of Naples, they don't know, whatever. He's been there since Friday, they're keeping him until like. Of the management and planning session to order. Do we need to do the pledge again? Do you guys? No. It's on here. Okay. Why is that on there? Okay. Huh? Do we always do the pledge? Do we need to do it again?
You don't have to do anything you don't want to do.
I love my country.
You're the mayor. Do what you want.
I'm asking you guys.
I think we can, since it's the same day.
Yeah, okay. All right.
This is just an extension of our first meeting.
The items for discussion amendments for the LDC Chapter 34 EC zoning district Chapter 6 and others. Michelle, my voice is cracking. Can you read the ordinance? I don't know if, do we need
It's not
to?
required, but I'll read
Okay,
it if you'd like.
you don't have to. If it's not required, don't worry about it.
Because it's just a discussion. It's not
Okay.
enough.
Jason, Green,
Good morning.
good morning. No, afternoon. Don't do that.
It was still morning.
Good late afternoon. So we had your comments from the previous meeting. Some of those are not reflected in here partially because those changes started generating other questions and comments. I'm going to try to walk through a couple things and get your feedback on it before we make any additional major changes. And so let me try to start with this because, again, it's change this, then A, B, C, and D may happen, or you may choose to go in a different direction, if that makes sense. One of the key issues that we talked about was section 6-366B, or new B, I should say, which is related to the location section. And I believe Vice Mayor Shamp was talking about removing sentences and going back and listening. I was saying we may not even need that section. So I want to put that in your mind first. That section, I think, can come out.
You repeat it again?
6-366, new B, which was talking about when existing major structures that are built partially or fully seaward of the 78 coastal construction line are reconstructed, blah, blah, blah.
What page?
I'm going to ask,
Packet page 11.
Packet 11, page packet 11.
I'm going to ask one clarifying question before you dig into this.
Okay.
What is the intent of these changes?
Clarifying, streamlining, ease of use.
Lots of intents.
But moreover, to make sure that there's, you sort of set the parameters for, well, if this happens, it's okay, it doesn't rise to the fact that it requires a public hearing, and then if it's larger than a bread box, it does. And I think that's part of what we try to do with these things, to make sure that's very clear.
So what's worked for us for 20 years is no longer working?
Well, that's a question for you to determine.
Well, I mean, I didn't bring this to me to look at. You guys did.
Well,
I just want to know the intent. Like, why?
Well, the intent is that you have asked us to look at the code, and as we encounter issues that we think there could be clarity on or be improved, to bring them to your attention. So that's what
Okay.
we're doing. So
Thank
if
you.
you don't think that it's appropriate, that's fine, we'll move on.
I just didn't know if there's something that I forgot that we asked about, but this
Well,
is,
no, but frankly, you had an appeal of an administrative decision
Right.
that came before you. So
Right.
I think that speaks to clarity.
So on B, the point you're making on new B, you're saying what?
Right, so I want to hold that paragraph in your mind, right? So I think there's a couple different ways we can go with this. One is what we talked about, which is eliminating some of the the rest of
Yes,
it, I think,
yes.
starting from exceptions.
Yes,
The other part was I wanted to introduce to you a concept that we talked a little bit about, which is limiting the amount, say, percentage of a structure that can be either modified, updated if it's an older structure, whether it's structurally or just maintenance of it, introduce that limitation. And so it can either go in this section, or we can remove all of this and we can put it in
you
other
mean if it
places.
crossed the line?
If there's an existing, for example, an
So you're
existing
going to let
structure.
them still have 50% of it across the
Matt,
line?
slow down for a second.
Sorry.
They do
I'm
now.
trying to clarify.
So one of the things we discussed last time was thinking of a new limitation on structures that are currently across the line. So if
Give me an
I have a
example.
house that's across the line, do we allow repair to that house?
No, it's non-conforming.
So you don't allow, so then the downside to that is, remember, you're gonna get dilapidated structures that sit there and rot for many, many years. So the policy decision I'm asking you to make is think about, do you want to allow that and continue that? Or do you want to allow minimal repair so you don't get dilapidated? Obviously, if they go over a percentage, I would suggest something lower than your 50% flood threshold, since it's EC. But there's 0 to that 50% really to play with. And what we talked about at the last meeting was coming up with a number. And I think what Sarah and I have talked about is using the 25% as a starting point, excuse me, for both repairs and for, I guess, for both minor and major structures.
But, okay, I understand that that's a threshold,
Mm-hmm.
but would they be able to remain over the line then with a 25% repair? Is that your point you're making? Or would
Yes.
part of the repair be they have to move back? You're saying leave it there over the line?
Correct. And
And
I'll give you
update
two
it.
scenarios. You have a house.
How many do we have? What are we talking, what's the scope here? 2, 5, 100?
I would guess a dozen or so, but it depends on the type of structure. You have porches, or decks, I'm sorry, that's the one we used as an example last time. You have a house that's on the line and a deck that's over. Those are easier to be more strict with because it's a deck, but then you've got access issues. A house over the line is a much more complicated thing, because if you say no, then you're really saying, just let the house fall apart, and at some point, we're gonna have to do code enforcement of make them tear it down and replace it. So that's the downside to that restriction.
But I'd have to say that with the value of beachfront property right now,
Mm-hmm.
people really aren't leaving those structures for very long because there's millions of dollars involved. Would you put that picture up for me? I just have to have this picture up because this is why we have the coastal construction line. And, it's really great on a sunny day and we haven't had any big storms. This is Hurricane Donna. This is our beach. That's the reason we have the coastal construction line. I own on the beachfront, I own 140 feet deeded seaward of the coastal construction line. I'd love to be able to build on it. I'm not gonna, because I know it's not right. I know we have a coastal construction line there, and I'm just speaking for myself. I'm gonna be hardline on this. Every question you ask,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna be, just letting you know, I'm gonna be hardline, because I have picture after picture of when we've had no beach there, from Charlie, from even Irma. Everybody knows, the beach disappears, there's a lot of seawalls hidden underneath there, and if the seawalls weren't there, the island parts of it would have disappeared. And I think, I just hold the line, so I wouldn't even give a percentage. You're across the line, and
So to the
you
point,
have
I
to-
just, prior to this catastrophic part, up to that point, my assumption is this was probably starting to fall apart as it was, the structure. But that's what you're saying, is essentially anything across the line can't be repaired, can't be replaced.
Well, you
zero
can,
tolerance.
but you have to move it, you have to take off that part that crosses the line.
Most of what we see
That
you
deck,
can't.
it's usually decks and stuff, so you take the deck off, the deck winds up on the side of the house instead of the front of the house extending forward.
Right, and then, of course, you have to, and then to that point, what we're seeing is that your entrance and your egress is from that back, then you've got to modify the house to have the egress from a side.
I mean, that's just,
Sure.
I made it very clear my feeling about it, I feel strongly about it. And it's preventing the environmental impacts, yes, but it's also just plain common sense that we need to limit the building there, so.
So, well, to move this forward, and is very simple, and that is that I think the vice mayor stated her position. If the majority of council have the same position, meaning that you don't want any repairs and you want the person moved back behind the line before the town issues any permits, let's get that resolved and we'll redraft the language to reflect that.
I can't answer that question because I don't have enough information. I need the answer to Bruce's question. How many of these structures are there? For example, I'm thinking about Joanne's house. If Joanne's house was forward of the coastal construction line, I would encourage her to repair her house because I want her house to stay on the island. If it was Harry and Jean Gottlieb's cottage that was forward, that's on Aberdeen, on the Aberdeen Beach, I know it's somebody else's now, but to me it'll always be theirs. But if that cottage was forward of the line, I would want that house to be repaired. So there's a certain, I need to know what it is. If there's only 12, Jason, can you tell us what those 12 situations are? If you tell me it's 12 decks and those decks can be somehow reconstructed to still provide those property owners with access and egress, as you said, okay, let's take the hard line. But if there are some properties that have that contribute character to this community, I'd want to keep them. I'd want
Don't
to allow
forget
them.
that line was built in front of most of these houses intentionally. That's why you watch the line, it goes neat, a
I
little
know,
bit
I know,
because
but that's
it
what I'm saying.
saved all those.
Give me the answer to that question. Are there any houses? Are there any cottages? I mean,
So I'm
I'd
gonna
wanna know
jump
that.
in and say two things. One is that I don't believe we have account and addresses to give you today. But if that's what's necessary for your decision-making process, clearly we'll move on to the next point. We'll get you that information, move on to the next
Sorry.
point. But moreover, is the policy really, if I understand what you're saying, Council Saracita, is the policy that you want to look at these on a case-by-case basis because in some cases, notwithstanding what the vice mayor said, you may be okay with some encroachment?
Well, I'm
And
gonna
we
say
could,
yes
and
to
we
that.
could, and then we
I'm
could
gonna say
word
yes
this
to that.
accordingly.
Yes.
So when I look at like the intent of this chapter, the application, the EC district is intended to prevent a public harm by precluding the use of land for purposes for which it is unsuited in its natural state and which injures the rights of others or otherwise adversely affects a defined public interest. I think you do have to tell them to come back and come to conformity because it does affect the public interest. I mean, one of the things when the code was adopted a long time ago was when you rebuilt or when they wanted everybody to come to conformity. You know, I mean, I understand the cottages. I love the cottage, the character too. But when people buy these up, you can't just keep putting patches on these old cottages. I mean, you know, these people are going to rebuild sooner or later. And it's just not safe. This picture, I mean, that's not safe.
Yes, but as Jason very well stated, that house was probably in great disrepair. And let's not forget the magnitude of Hurricane Donna. That was the year I was born, 57 years ago. So we haven't had a hurricane like that since, thank God. We certainly could have. But I just think, like I said, I gave you my reasons.
So the conversation was pick a number, figure out if there's a percentage, and what it sounds like is there's ifs to that conversation.
So it's a line in the sand, you can't be over, can't repair, can't get a permit, can't do anything, or if you want to try to repair to any degree, you have to come before town council and get approval because the repair is something you deem insignificant, is the word I'll use.
What's the answer today? If somebody came in today,
there's a 50% rule for FEMA. There isn't really guidance in there about an existing structure. How do you deal with repair? So if
On
I was
the
replacing,
AC.
if it was a house and I'm replacing windows, it doesn't prevent you from doing that, but it also doesn't say, this is the process.
It's like, I wouldn't want to, if you happen to have a house on the EC zone, I'm gonna go another side to this. If you live on the beach, your property rights shouldn't be more burdensome than someone like me on a canal. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like,
So
every
that's a
property
question.
should be treated
If
the
you have
same.
if you have a leak in your roof, and you happen to be a property that's been there for 40 years and 50, 60, whatever it is, and encroaching, what do we do about it? What do we allow, what do we not allow?
Repair their roof.
You what?
I think they should be allowed to repair their roof.
See, I guess that's what I'm saying, like, are we changing the rules just for people in the Gulf by doing this?
So I would think the intent of when we were talking about it and trying to read what you guys were thinking last time was, I think there's a higher standard in the EC. So whether it's a line in the sand, or whether it's a lower threshold than what we use for the flood. And that was our
Are you
original
talking
thinking.
about the gentleman who had to replace his pool screen?
No, I'm thinking, I'm
Okay.
just, in general, I'm not talking about
All
anybody
right.
specific. I'm talking about, under normal circumstances, a
Yep.
non-pre-firm structure that's not across the EC line would have a 50% threshold by our current policy. I think it's a lower percentage than that, so I was trying to use that as kind of the high-end watermark of where you would want to be, and it'd be much lower than that. So that's where the 25% came from.
So the LPA heard this and they passed it 7-0. What was their take on that part of it?
That part did not come up. They did not.
This is different, so they didn't hear this part.
Right, this is based on your conversation at the last MMP meeting, the feedback. We got very specific feedback from you on text on certain things, and I'm trying to go over the 4 or 5 general points that were ideas. And unfortunately, those ideas have generated more changes. So this whole 25% conversation, I can't draft it for you because it changes 5 to 6 sections. And there's subparts to all this. So it's really trying to get further with this general policy direction. And I think Roger said it's kind of 2 camps. And we can do 2 examples or 2 drafts, but I'm always trying to narrow it down from 10 to 2, you know.
Dennis had something.
Yeah, I'm looking at, yes, they're over the line, maybe they've been there 34 years. If they're have an issue with their roof, they should be able to replace their roof. They're not
Yeah.
expanding their footprint, they're not doing anything like that. If a window got blown out and they gotta replace a window, that's something. But if they're doing all kinds of other things just for aesthetic value or to improve their house or whatever, that's a different story. Then they're over the line and they gotta abide by that. But just because they're over the line and a coconut falls and puts a big hole in their roof, they need to replace the roof. I don't think they should have to take the whole house down just to replace that roof.
Yeah.
If they're adding things to that,
Right.
I'm with you. But just like a roof or a window or a front door, something on the envelope that's not expanding
That's an
the
Anita structure.
footprint, just to remake that type of a repair.
Right, so the 20, and that's
Deck,
kind of
yeah.
where.
I mean, a deck or a
Sure.
swimming pool or anything else, as far as I'm concerned, no, you can't do it.
And that's
But
kind of where the
Those
25%.
type of, almost like an emergency repair.
And that's where that 25% comes from.
That's the way I feel about it.
Right, and so that's, for a setback, for example, a setback, non-conforming setback, we say you could do some minor repair, like maybe the wood on top of your deck, but you can't do a structural repair, which would still apply here, but again, that's not really defined. So that's why we're trying to define it.
So is there support for what Councilor Boback said, which is basically that if it's the
Minor
envelope, the security envelope of the main structure, you could do that, okay? Window, door, roof, but if it's stuff other than that, you want them to do X could be no, no, and no? Is it no, but you can come in front of council and ask for a yes?
You can
And that's
always
what we're
come
trying
in
to.
front of council and ask for
All
a
right,
yes.
so the way we'll word it is, if it's not is there consensus that it's not the window, door, roof, they can't do anything else unless they come in front of council and get council consent.
I'm leaning that way, but I'm still trying to figure out, if I lived on the beach right now and I had a broken window, can I fix it?
If you, we're only talking about
No, I'm not talking
forward
about
of the
this.
seaward,
Right.
of the coastal construction line.
That's what I mean. If my house is over right now and I come over to you, Jason, and I say, hey, my house is a little bit over the coastal construction line, coconut came through the window and busted, I need to repair the window, what do you tell them?
We'd be inclined to allow you to replace the window.
Okay, so right now you can. I don't
Yes.
want to take that right away.
I'll be
Well,
surprised,
but
I'll be
he's saying
surprised if you find a single house over the line, I'm just letting you know.
Really?
I hope you're right.
I'll be surprised.
I hope you're right. I guess that's
there's
what I
none
want
of
to know, but.
That's why I asked the
It's
question.
not a big
So
problem.
May
my
I-
answer to you, Roger, is yes.
I agree with Dennis.
Okay, all right, so I think we can move on to the next point, John.
But I think
Yeah,
the attorney.
I was going to make a couple observations for whatever they're worth, and admittedly, this has been in the process for some time. I think that the concept that staff is proposing is that, if an existing structure is already over the CCL, then the impact upon the EC, the environmentally critical area, is already there. So do you want them to allow them to, a percentage of repairs in order to avoid it becoming a blight? And not discouraging the property owner from making improvements to their structure that are in the normal course of maintenance that may be required, broken window. With that said, even though, and I will look to staff if I'm misinterpreting this or misapplying it, but you always then default back to the non-conforming provision of your land development regulations that say if anything is not in conformance with your land development code and triggers the 50% or more in value, then you have to meet all the currently in existence regulations, which would mean including the setback. The question that staff had asked is that for the CCL, would you want a lower threshold of maybe 25%?
Is that
Is that-
25% in here? Did you
I'm sorry?
put it in?
No, it was as we
a-
were drafting it, it became evident that I needed more direction from you. on
So
what-
25% of the property, if it needs to be, do we have to do percentage, or can we just say like minor repairs, use what you said, like the security envelope?
My inclination is, if your intent is to facilitate people getting back get back behind the line, then you say, look, if we're going to make sure there's, your envelope is maintained, but anything else that you want to do, you either have to incorporate moving it behind the line, or you have to come to town council and get an exception.
So here's where I'm stuck. I want people to be able to fix their window or fix their door, but if they're going to do any major changes, I want them to come in.
That's what I just said, thought I just said. But
what I said.
if there's consensus for that, then we can move on. We'll draft it that way.
And I'm the biggest stickler in the mud about this, but if this new B, the first sentence stays, because that's what the real concern is, that page 11,
Okay.
the 6366, the new B down there, near the bottom.
Okay, I'm there, yep.
That first sentence, when existing major structures that were built partially or fully seaward are reconstructed, they should be landward of this line. So people know that reconstruction means
Yes.
whatever. But then you could add another sentence after that saying for repairs, however, for whatever, minor.
We really have to.
Can we hit on that
Define what
point?
that is.
Can we hit on that point real quick?
Yeah.
Because that sentence isn't needed if we're not going to caveat that, right? Because you allow special exceptions for a single-family residence. You're probably never going to approve one, but it's a use listed in your special exception. So I'm always cautious about putting an absolute statement in there that says it shall be, but then we have this process that allows you to come in and ask for it. So that's why my original statement last meeting was, I don't think we need this section unless you really want to, get rid of single family as a special exception use. Then you can,
Yeah, I agree. We do not want single-family residence built across that
No,
line.
no. We don't want even multifamily built
No,
across.
no.
Nothing.
So-
Nothing across that line.
just for the record, because one of the big questions that was asked of us, are you changing anything or taking anything away? That is a use that's currently allowed as a special exception,
What is?
single family residence.
Have we ever Has the town ever?
My point is I'm
Hang on a
trying to answer you, we're not making any major changes. That is a change of use.
Currently,
anyway.
a single-family residence is allowed to be constructed
A special
seaward?
exception use. They can come to
Wait
you
a
and
minute.
ask you to, my brain is thinking it's, if I
argue with you.
want to be over it a little bit, or the dune's really not there.
Jason,
I don't know the reasons why they would ask, but
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna
Okay,
have
well,
to, hold you up for a second, because I'm not sure you're right. Not sure you're wrong, but I'm not sure you're right. You're saying that today,
go to
somebody could,
packet page 9,
I'm not going to my packet, I'm going to my land development code.
okay, or package.
But I'm not.
Packet
Tell me.
page 9.
Page 9,
Packet
what?
page 9, E, special exception uses. You can see the strikeout and underlines that we've edited, because that is from the code. And single-family residence is not been touched.
34, 652D and E.
But that doesn't mean you build across the line. That means what your density allowance is. In other words, my 140 feet that I own seaward of the coastal construction line only has a value of 1 per 20 acres. That's used not to build, but to calculate is my,
This section is specifically uses allowed by special exception in the EC district. So there's two parts to that, right? And again,
Okay.
we go back to mixing things. Your density in the other
Okay.
part of the code that we know talks about 1
but
to
somebody
20.
would somebody not need to have 20 acres of beachfront seaward of the coastal construction line to qualify for that? So basically, it's prohibited because you'd have to have 20 acres in the coastal construction line to qualify for one.
For 1 unit. Or if you have density from the other part of your zoning, you could essentially ask for, cumulatively, I have the rights for 1 unit, and I want to put the unit partially or fully over that line.
But it states here, okay.
So I think, let's be clear. We want to say there's no new construction clearly beyond the line, right?
Clearly.
Clearly, okay.
So if you
Then the
need to
question
change that, change
becomes,
it.
so we can make that clear. And then the second point is the point I think there's consensus on, which is to say that unless it's a window, door, or roof, and you're over the line, unless it's a window, door, or roof, if you want to do anything else beyond that, you have to come in front of council and explain the need to do that versus bringing back your property behind the line. Is that kind of where you all are
And
at?
are we going like window, like if I want to put a new window in just for fun, or because it's a repair because I broke it? Or
It's
does
a
it
window
matter?
is a window.
Okay.
We're not stating the reason why.
I think
If
that's
somebody
fine
wanted to
because
upgrade
I don't
from
think you're going to
regular-
find very many. You're going to find like the beach pub. There's a couple of commercial spots. You won't find much residential, I don't think. I'd be surprised.
Good.
Okay, can we move on to the next one?
Yes,
Yes, okay. Temporary structures was a question about definitions, my least favorite subject.
What page are you on? Sorry.
Well, we don't have a temporary structure definition. What you directed us to do is
Are
go,
we still talking about EC?
EC, it's all EC, this is all EC.
Okay.
Temporary structures came up because in the code currently, there's several places where it talks about, it gives a list of examples. It'll say tents and such and blah, blah, blah. And so
It's not in here, so I'm not going to find
it's not,
this.
you're not going to
Okay.
find it in here. You can find language that is trying to refer to what is temporary structures. So through this whole thing with adding definitions, trying to revise the definitions, we've looked at temporary structures. What we have provided you today is, on page 15, is several new definitions for your consideration. We did not include temporary structures because if you'll look, most of the new definitions that we found for your consideration, Sarah's research and stuff, basically from a Florida administrative code, trying to align up consistency with state law and that sort of thing. There isn't a good definition for temporary structures. So my question to you essentially is, would you like to formally define it and we can do it again somewhat as a such as, and then list types of things, tents?
Because on page 8, packet 8, you're talking about temporary structures.
Yes.
At packet 8.
So-
Packet page 8.
Yep, so, right, and so there's opportunities of temporary movable objects. We don't have to refer to them as structures, we can create, nobody has a really good definition of temporary structures. I think everybody essentially struggles with this, and they're not really structures. So I guess that's kind of where we're at. So if you would like.
But doesn't our code also, am I incorrect? Our temporary structures are limited to like 6 months or something at a time? Or is that,
Anything can only be, it can't have nothing over that line during turtle season.
Wish I knew this was gonna be
I'm-
asked
I'm-
ahead.
I am concerned about the definition of minor structures and all that, so I'm glad we're into this, but, and the difference between a temporary structure and a minor structure, how they interact is really important in this zone, I think.
Yes, so so for example, that packet page 15, you have minor structures, which is the existing definition. And it goes through a list such as, we could do a similar, we're trying to get away from that on the minor structures definition, but if we had to, we could do it on the temporary. The temporary is such a open-ended, I'm picturing tents for special
It
events.
seems like to me, you could do 5-page packet, whatever. D5, where it refers to temporary structures. So it looks like to me, you could just strike out temporary structures and say you can do recreation that doesn't alter the natural landscape and be done with it. But English is not my strong suit.
So, let me make it more confusing.
Oh,
Just
Roger.
eliminate.
Thankfully, not me.
I think we should,
Badminton court or something.
and on page 8, number 9, which is the bottom of page 8. We should take out the word minor structure. Just say temporary movable structures on private property, or, because I think when you start putting the word minor structures, then people start thinking about sheds and other things. If you say temporary and movable, it clarifies that. Or if you're going to leave minor structures in, then I would definitely not put by right. So it's sort of one or the other.
Yep.
I like the temporary movable.
So temporary
That
and
means
movable,
a
get rid of and minor.
Temporary movable what?
We even thought.
Structures.
Structures,
Temporary movable
objects.
structure, objects, structures.
And then they
fine.
need to be
Take it out
defined.
minor.
Then we have to define it. So
But that could be, a temporary structure could be a major structure. What is temporary? I mean,
There are not many major structures that are movable.
like,
A temporary movable structure is essentially something you erect and you take down.
Tent?
It's a tent. It's
you
a,
know-
it's a kid's playground, play set.
Okay, what
It's
about a
something that
shed?
you, it's,
Some of them sheds are
it's not a
Shed
shed.
is a minor structure.
a shed you need a permit for, and it has to be anchored.
That's right. A shed has a roof.
Yeah, they do have movable sheds. They have them on skids. You can pick them up and move them.
People could start putting
you just gotta,
cabanas out there.
remember what people will come with a loophole, say, well,
You could start, I could build a pink and 2 blue cabanas out there, one for each of my grandkids. But my husband is able, with assistance, to move it, with about 8 other people trying to move it.
So the flip side of that, if you're worrying about how people may perceive temporary and movable,
put it on wheels. It's movable.
is then leave it the way it's written and cross out by right, and then they have to apply and has to be reviewed.
Say that again?
That if you're concerned about people finding loopholes, then the way you correct that would be to strike out the words by right at the end of the first line, and you make it subject to application review.
You say are permitted or maybe, like, not, don't
Yeah,
say.
you may be permitted.
Yeah, that way
Okay.
it's our discretion,
Right.
your discretion. That way nobody can say
Right,
it's
so
permitted.
it's already, that is under the, again, structure, it's under the permitted uses, but I think to Roger's point is not additionally supporting you can go do it, the impression that you can just go do it. Anything needs to be permitted or reviewed or whatever.
Hey, just because we're on this page, I have a really quick question.
Sure.
On C accretion,
Yes.
accretions of beaches or wetlands, whether by natural causes or through beach and renourishment, or is said artificially, change it to approved filling. What is the purpose for that change? I don't like it. Make me like it.
You can get a permit to redo the beach. You can get, like we said in there, renourishment or other type of improvement can be made. That's a big,
By natural
Us and
causes or
state
through
permit.
beach renourishment or, instead of artificial, approved filling.
But don't forget, we had, for instance, I can't remember the name of the condo at the time. Remember when the critical wildlife area was all moving around or whatever, and we had that one, we had to allow them to like shore up at their base? And,
Leonardo
thank you, Leonardo Arms. And so they, just that one piece, actually had to do something to shore themselves up, and I think that that's
And it-
an important part. But I also want to make sure that nothing in the way this is stated doesn't imply that the property owners still don't have to sign an easement
Right.
for renourishment or whatever.
That's
that
kind of where
we're-
I'm going. There was a big deal years ago about that.
so the, and Sarah reminded me that came out of the LPA, essentially, it was the, how do you describe it? The concern of defining what is artificial, concern of us, all that kind of stuff. So I get your point. The main change to that was really trying to just get rid of the automatically assigned. I think as we stated, or you stated, the 78 line, the best way for us to go about it is probably just, that's the line, regardless, because otherwise, frankly, it's going to get lost. If we change zoning districts, moving it back and forth, nobody will be able to keep track
Joanne,
of
you
it.
worked like super hard on this year, back in what, '08 or something? Are you okay, comfortable with this one, this line?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that all of these programs, they have to have easements for. And so long as our wording doesn't imply something other than that, that when you do a large beach renourishment program and they're actually putting sand up onto people's private property
don't
and
take
they
it.
run equipment across it, you have to have these easements.
Okay, so you're comfortable with that?
As long as they say it doesn't change the expectation of easements, you know.
We can add that, though, with proper easements.
Well, I think also you might want to say, rather than says is permitted, say may be permitted, so, because you say approved, so if it's unapproved, it won't be permitted, so you might want to say may be permitted.
Be careful with the word may. There was an issue with the word may with docks, about a dock may have this, and
There was definitely an issue with.
remember that one? That was Linda Beasley's
I sure
next
do
door.
remember, well, it
And
was more than
we
that.
came in, and because it said in the code that you may, and may means possibly, you know, but the staff had approved it, and it became a nightmare.
But, so, again, when you use the word may, what comes with that is that there'll be a proper application of the word may by the staff. And I understand your concern.
Depends on who your staff is.
I understand your concern with that, okay? But our charge, generally speaking, is to not write the code because Roger's here, or Jason's here, or Sarah's here, or John's here, but the way you want the code to read, assuming all of us are doing our jobs properly. So that's why we're advising you that perhaps in this case, when it says approved filling is permitted, that means that if it's approved, whatever that is, or is automatically permitted whether you want it or not, versus approved filling may be permitted means you have a chance of saying no. So you're going to a lesser standard, in my opinion. I mean, a higher standard, depending on your point of view, but.
I'm going to read something to you in the Land Development Code. May, the term may shall be construed as being permissive and will mean has discretion to, is permitted to, or is allowed to. May not shall be construed as being mandatory and will mean is disallowed from or is not permitted to.
Right, but the way it's written right now, it says artificial filling is permitted. So that means 100% of the time it is
Right.
permitted. What we're saying, we're suggesting, at least I am, is artificial filling may be permitted, means you have the opportunity to say no. The way it's currently drafted, you don't have no opportunity
But
to say
I'm
no.
telling you that the definition of may in our Land Development Code has the term may shall be construed as being permissive, so it doesn't give you the
Next
discretion.
sentence, read the next.
Well, I will, and will mean has discretion to, and is permitted to. It conflicts itself in here.
Well, has discretion to means that we have discretion to say
But it
no.
also says is permitted to or is allowed to.
Means you could say yes or you could say no, is the way I hear that.
I see that legally challenged, someone saying, hey, this says, I'm allowed to, or it has discretion to.
We happen to have a legal advisor here. What's he say?
Should we rip out the part that says allowed or permitted, just says
Well,
discretion?
Here's my suggestion.
This is what happened with the docks.
It is, both points are well taken. I believe the way to potentially resolve the issue is to limit the discretion by identifying some language, some descriptive language as to it may happen if there is a determination of the following. And I'm not, I defer to staff as to what that may be. So there is some basic or minimum criteria to guide not only staff, but ultimately the town council if the item ultimately gets to you, as opposed to, a case-by-case ad hoc decision-making process. That's where the courts say local governments get into trouble, both at the staff level and at the council, at the governing body level, when decisions are made without any guidelines.
So if you want to be it at the staff's discretion, why not put it, just use the word has the discretion to instead of may?
And in the context of what we're talking about, may be allowed if it is determined that the fill will have no detrimental environmental effects on the ecosystem.
I'm not trying to make this hard for you, Jason. I'm just telling you what's happened in the past, and it will happen again.
Well, I think your point,
It
Mayor.
may, but it
Mayor,
will.
I think your point is, part and parcel of looking at this is to look at the definition that you just read and make sure that it's clear as well.
I don't think the definition of may is clear in our book.
So I think we need to take a look at that as well.
Okay, put that on your list, Jason.
At the end of the day, we're trying to allow it, but as John said, under certain parameters. So we'll double check the base renourishment section, that's probably somewhere else, to see what the requirements are there too, because I think there's some standards elsewhere in the code. But the intent was, one, to continue to allow it, and two, where appropriate, and then two, eliminate the automatic rezoning component of it, which again, one, it's illegal, and two, we don't want to take somebody's property, I think, and using that 78 line makes the most sense at this time.
Well, while we're at that
Uh-oh.
section D5, the recreation activities on public property.
There's several notes that you've given us that weren't reflected in there yet.
Why is active recreation still in there? When you look at the definition of active recreation,
Oh.
it says means recreational pursuits which require physical alteration of the area in which they're performed, and we're saying we're not allowing
We
physical
have that note
alteration.
to remove that. That's,
Okay, good.
that-
Because
Thank you.
Bruce had brought that up, because that's in my notes from last time.
Right,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, so I got two more quick things. Well, one big thing, dune walkovers. Dune
Walkovers.
Dune
Yes.
walkovers.
I got that.
ADA accessibility, which really isn't applicable necessarily to single family as a requirement. It may be a consideration for a dune walkover. Plant protection was a topic that came up at the last one. We have language in here under page 9, E6. The way it's drafted and edited by our draft is the perpendicular dune walkovers on private property. This is what we added when required to protect indigenous plant communities, and then the rest of that was already there. That's the question. I think Vice Mayor Champ, you had mentioned concern about requiring I think it was having to protect the plant species to be able to have the dune walkover. And I think
All anybody has to do is plant some indigenous plants, and then they can have a walkover?
it'd be renourishing the dune, yeah. I mean, that'd be an option. So, so the question is, how many? Because I think Mr. Butcher said one for every property.
The first time one's up, they're gonna go everywhere.
Correct. So right now it's every 150 feet,
Can't do that.
and it does not limit people to do a joint one, but there's one every 150 feet. And then the question was, do you want to create criteria so the ADA stuff doesn't necessarily apply, but it could be a criteria that you use to evaluate whether they get one or not. But again, there's a pros and cons to that of you being in a position to judge whether somebody's reasoning is a true reason. So
I have an issue.
Those are the things that we've hit the wall on.
My
as far-
issue with the whole 150 feet is, that's like saying that someone like me on the canal, you can have a dock, but the next 3 people can't. The next guy can have a dock. That's a property right issue. I mean, either you can or you can't. You can't say Joanne can have it, but Artis can't. You know?
Can I play devil's advocate for you, just to, as fun?
That's your
That's a
job.
man-made, excavated, walled place, right? It's not really environmental. This is a natural beach that we're talking about. So I think there's a slight difference between the two. However, it's what is your
See, I think-
acceptance of how many
I
they get
still
on there.
think that the dune walkover concept is really made where there's significant elevation changes. Like when you think about the downtown zoning district, they have elevation changes when they leave the property and drop down to the beach. A lot of the residential areas down that beach don't have that. I have as well-developed dunes as anybody has on the property. They just don't get that high. And all you need is to run a path through them. There's no need for me to actually build a structure to cross over that. So I feel like, in a way, it could be defined better in that dune crossovers, you know, when necessary for, to protect whatever, when there's an elevation change from, do you know what I mean? Like,
That elevation change, actually, in Lynn Hall Park has been created by the dunes. That's because otherwise, if you remember, well, maybe you remember, I don't know if you do, that Lynn Hall Park was flat out to the water, and now it's not.
well, look at Newton Park. There's some properties there that have to be able to have dune walkovers, but there's a lot of properties that don't. So this whole idea, in those areas where they really need them, you can't make them be 150 feet apart because it's not fair. Then the guy next door to Newton Park and the next house down can't have them, and they need them. Whereas in my section of the beach, they don't. So my personal point of view is that there may be some other qualifiers that we need, and then you don't worry about the 150 feet because there's certain areas that actually need them.
I think that's part of the reason why we introduced the vegetation, and I guess it's a question of what dunes need to be walked over versus don't, and that may be part of the question that you're asking.
Oh, it's an interesting thought. If we had an ideal situation, would we take dunes over walkovers? Because if everybody did, in fact, plant dunes along the beachfront, that would protect the island. So maybe the walkover's not so bad. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, so in our worst case scenario, oh, everybody's going to plant dunes. Okay, plant them. Do you follow me?
I do, absolutely.
But what if you're planting your dunes and your property is close to the water, and then you put the walkover and it's, you know?
Well, and the
The
other
beach is such a
issues-
weird shape.
And the other issue is then it can block other people's views. It's just like boathouses and things. Now, all of a sudden, you have these visual blocks across the beach. And we don't want to encourage, I think we want to limit dune walkovers.
150 feet is barely wider than a lot of the, what's a house? 75 feet to 100 feet on the beach?
Mine's 100 and
So there's 75 on the beachfront.
It's essentially
Well, that's
every
over
other,
75.
it's essentially every other lot.
Yeah, that's what 150 feet, it's every other lot.
So
So
you're
why
saying
not make
you
it
can have
every
a-
lot? I'd say make it every lot.
Per
I
parcel.
don't think that you can, I would say you can't tell one person you can and the other person you can't.
Right, because just because somebody's got it 150 feet away, that doesn't mean I can traipse through their backyard.
Right.
Now,
To get to it.
okay, here's another thought, though. Those of us who've been through storms just like Charlie, and let's not say it wasn't Donna, let's say it's Charlie, let's say it's all these other ones. How many
Don't get me
times-
wrong, Joanne, any of those storms could have been worse than Donna.
Yeah. Yeah, we got lucky that they weren't.
Yes, we did.
But how many times have we rebuilt the walkway down from Newton Park?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't forget, when I leave, when a person has a dune walkover that leaves their property and goes over the dune, they're now building in the EC. We're talking about, obviously, structures in the EC, and they're going seaward. We haven't defined how far they can go. We're creating structure after structure after structure that can create a huge mess.
I don't like that. I don't like structure after structure after structure.
I agree. I think
Well,
this needs to be
here's
rethought.
here's the question, listening to the discussion, here's the question that's kind of running through my head. That is, do you want to make these by right, or do you want to make that where they're subject to review? Okay, and then If you're inclined to make some of them by right, what criteria do you want to put on the ones that you want to grant to by right? So what Jason was proposing, if they're more than 150 feet apart, that's by right. That may not be the right criteria in your minds, might be something else. Or do you want to sort of take the most conservative approach? And that is that if someone needs one, they come in for review.
I think,
I would do them all by review.
I would all by review, and that you have to let the neighbors know, so all the neighbors can come in.
Okay, so if that's the consensus of the council, then we can move on. We'll change the words to reflect that.
You know, so that the neighbors have to come in, that way everybody has to hear everybody's side.
Yeah, so through the special exception process, everybody gets noticed. I think to Saracina's point, I think the interesting part of that is a definition, what you also were talking about, of the dune walkover. You technically can't have a dune walkover without a dune. So there's an opportunity to clearly define, to get a dune walkover. If you're going to do more, then perhaps it's you also must create a dune to walk over, which then enhances the protection of the town.
You know, when we were kids, there was no dune walkovers, there was always just these paths with the dunes around us.
Right.
When
Because
did
you
that
could cut,
change?
When
you
you
could
were a
cut through
kid, there
the,
weren't many dunes either.
But-
I mean,
But we had like the seals, we had all the stuff, and we would just
Yeah.
walk through the paths to get to the beach. You know that book, We Never Wore Shoes? Well, I'm the generation that learned about sand spurs, and we put flip-flops on. So we would put our flip-flops on and go around those dunes and get to there.
And
But
then
like,
another point with regard to these walkovers, though, we have that they have to be at a minimum of 2 feet above the dune. I think we need, whatever we do, I think we have to make sure how tall they are, because I just see what's happening with the elevated houses, and then you've got your infinity pool, and then you have a huge dune walkover, what you claim is a dune walkover that goes from your house at 2 feet above BF, base flood elevation, goes out, pretends to be going over a dune, but it's really a giant viewing platform and then comes down. I'm just saying, I think we need to define that is not a dune walkover. You know what I mean? We have a minimum height, we don't have a maximum
Walkover should not be
height.
attached to any physical structure.
That's right, it shouldn't be attached to
Very well
a
said.
structure or something.
Every
Sorry,
once in a while, it comes up.
I'm just looking for
every
loopholes
now
and
and then, you
things that
remind
might
us you've been here a
happen.
long time.
Does that make sense to you? that
yes,
we need to
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We can see, part of this is not just writing good code, but think about the way it can be manipulated. So, yeah, so I think.
Also, we don't want people sleeping underneath the dune walkovers.
Correct.
So we
So
want
there's a
lower.
trade-off, and you're going to have a special exception before you about that from the park, and essentially that's their point to the DEP didn't want them, according to them, to have it higher than the dune because of vegetation's not going to survive anyway, so better beef up the planting on the sides of it leading into it than underneath and all that
So
stuff.
it ain't attached to another structure.
Correct. So, okay, well, we'll look at the height maximum, that sort of thing, to consider that again, because that's a good point, and then also perhaps weaving in some of the dune creation as a justification for it. So I think that's a good point. But that's kind of it for the big picture items. I don't.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll incorporate those, and I think that gives us some good policy direction in terms of trying to get you a product to bring back to the next MMP with the actual words in it.
And if
Thank you
we do
so
have new
much.
definitions in there, so we'll bring those back again, but please read those, and so you're prepared, we can adopt new definitions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason Green.
Thank you.
You ever called his voicemail? Jason Green.
And you too, Sarah.
I was just making fun of Jason. Okay.
Okay.
Discuss vacation of public property and other neighborhood enhancements. What's so
Okay,
funny?
so. So, Madam Mayor and members of the council, we've had you raise in various MMPs a variety of potential neighborhood improvements, things such as canal dredging, bayside piers, pocket parks, and of course, the latest thing we have is a situation with, where people's private property, back, a rear lot line does not abut the seawall, but the town owns a strip of property in between. And clearly, we can bifurcate those and have a different approach for each one of those. Or we can have a global approach to those, depending on the council's preference and how they think those issues should be publicly vetted or not. So we bring this back before you so you can provide us with some thoughts and guidance so we can begin to see if we need to draft either procedures or code language or the appropriate information so that we can get this documented and the public knows how to proceed.
So before we start this conversation, it says discuss vacation of public property and other neighborhood enhancements. Do we want to stick to the vacation part? Because other neighborhood enhancements is going to be a huge, there's so much. That's a very broad.
Well, I think it's for you to decide whether the approach is going to be the same or different, but that's, I think one of the things I heard it, last time we talked about vacations is that we really don't want to do them on a one-off, Lot A does it, but Lot B, C, D, and E doesn't. We want to do it. So now we say, how do we get 5, 10, 20 property owners on the same page? And we need a process to do that.
If I might, I believe that this whole thing started with the vacation request from Denora. And just to be upfront, I live on Denora. So,
We didn't know that.
well, and I haven't looked at my survey lately, but I'm going to guess that I probably got that same 1 or 2 foot down to like 6 inches, just like everybody else on my side of the canal. I have no idea what's on the other side. I would, in my opinion, I think rather than going property by property by property, we go canal by canal, or at least one side of the canal. And you either vacate them all or you don't.
So is that the question here? Is the question changing the way we vacate properties is what I read? Jason Green?
I think he's looking for, how do we want to get the process moving to do that?
Well, that's what it's saying here. Within our packet, they're saying, talking about simpler method.
Right.
But I pulled like the Florida statute and the current way we vacate property. And when they did that back in 2012, that was when Larry Kiker was the mayor, Marilyn Miller was the attorney. They said that they did this. Town Attorney Miller reviewed the changes to the vacation of plat procedure to more accurately reflect state law requirements to make the process less cumbersome. She noted the amendments would streamline the process while still assuring that vacations of rights-of-ways and easements are only approved where it has been determined by town council that right-of-way or easement was no longer needed. It goes on to it. But then when you go to Florida statute, it's kind of a big deal to get rid of public property. That's a big deal when you vacate property that we own, the public owns.
Can we hear from Mr.?
Yeah, well, I want to tell them where I'm at, though.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to, are we looking at a certain canal here, or are you asking us, do we want to change the way we vacate the property?
Well, I know, I think,
I'm reading
here's what I think. I think your point that we need to be extremely careful about vacating public property is well taken and needs to be protected. You have situations where you have two property owners perhaps on the street end, and they come in and they say, hey, there's only 2 of us. We want to vacate the right-of-way between us and, our property lines. You're dealing with 2 properties. That's a very straightforward, comes through a process, council reviews it, makes a determination, and it's a yes or no process. When you have other situations that involve 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 potential property owners, it gets a lot more complicated, a lot quicker. And the thing that I get concerned about is that we have consensus of the involved people that the vast majority of them want the same thing before we spend a whole bunch of time and effort trying to figure out whether we can do it and looking at whether it's a good thing to do and all of that type of stuff. So what we're saying is we really need to see if there's a process whereby there's people apply, there's a review, before we spend a lot of money on engineering, surveying, technical information, there's, good willingness on the public's part and the council's part to move forward with the idea and all of that, and culminating in some type of formal decision-making process by the neighborhood and the council, that at the end of the day, it's going to cost X amount of money, and everyone still thinks it's a good idea, and who's going to pick up that amount of money? Anyway, the town's picking it all up, maybe the residents are picking some of it, the property owners are picking up some of it, or whatever, however that works out. Everyone's on the same page before we actually get to a final approval. And that's kind of sort of the way I'd like to see us move forward. If that's in agreement with how the council envisions dealing with these issues. So,
Still didn't answer my question.
okay,
I simply want to know, are we talking about canals? Are we talking about all the vacation of, are you looking to change the way we
Town
vacate
property
property?
vacation process discussion, all town property.
Right, but they seem to be talking about the canal.
no, what I'm saying, I'm saying that the case on the Nora, for example, to me, a decision to go forward and do that and the process that we use there would, in my mind, and maybe only in my mind, would be no different than if 3 property owners came over and said, hey, we want to start a process to dredge the canal behind our house.
I agree with you.
So if you agree with me, then let's set the process to cover that and other similar examples. And if you don't agree with me, then we won't.
Well, I think you're looking at two different kinds of vacations. No, let me finish. If it's a property, let's say it's that property down on,
Virginia.
right, on Virginia, okay? That's not causing any more liability or any kind of liability to the town other than what they own there. When you're looking at the canals, and I'm going specifically to Denora because that's where we've seen where the property lines and stuff are. Do we want to own that property and have the liability of them seawalls? Somebody fisherman walking down across the seawalls falls and gets hurt. That's the town's property. We're liable for all that stuff, in my opinion. I mean, we'll defer to the town attorney, but we own that property. It doesn't do us any good, and it's a liability, in my opinion. And like I said, if it's another town-owned property that doesn't have any other liability than what we normally have for owning a parcel of land, like on Virginia, we own that property. We're not taking on any extra liability. In these instances here, we're taking on the liability for the seawall.
So the point I'd like to make is, I think that there are different vacations, and there's different neighborhood options, and I kind of, I made a little list, and I think it might be helpful, so let's just pass it down here, that way, give one to Michelle.
Joanne, I think you should start labeling these. Joanne's list number 1, Joanne's list number 2.
I think we're at
So when we start-
4,301.
So when we're talking about Joanne's list, we know
But
which
see,
one we're talking about.
the resident,
Yeah.
I just put a title of residential street programs, okay? Because this is what we're talking about, residences. And it does say in the comp plan that the town should develop residential street programs, provide guidelines and technical assistance to neighborhoods that wish to improve their public spaces. So there's some basis. And don't forget, we already have that ordinance 98-4, which we need to vacate or amend probably, which is an ordinance establishing the town of Fort Myers Beach Neighborhood Improvement Maintenance District Ordinance. So then you look at the options. Well, what things would people might want to do in a neighborhood? Well, on the side streets, and I put comp plan things, there's references to landscaping in the right-of-way and lighting, okay? And then there's traffic and safety, policy 7E2, traffic calming, speed bumps. I'm just talking about things that have come up, all right?
Already in the
Then-
comp plan to
That
do.
are already in the comp plan. The next one is neighborhood parks, that's objective 10H. And that's provide a mechanism for requesting neighborhoods to create and manage these parks, whatever, and it talks about it. So, but these are different because the vacation of the end of a street at the bay, you wouldn't do. That would be a neighborhood park. But along the canals, yes, they could ask for vacation. My point is, I think that we have different different processes for different kinds of public property within a neighborhood even.
Before
So-
you go, but while you're on Canal.
Yeah.
Just as an example, you go Palermo, the circle, people are on the canal. The inside of the people that are not on the canal, there's a 20-foot easement, or that's a right-of-way to the bay. That is the dry side.
Right.
That's their way to get to the bay, and they sit there. So I remember years ago, they were talking about vacating that to the two property owners, but the people that live on the dry side of Palermo was like, no,
No, you
that's
have
part
to-
of our
you have to be
deed.
really
Same with
careful of that.
Virginia, there's a dry side of Virginia. And so that's why they don't want to vacate that, because that's their property.
Right. So then when you get down, and then of course, our streets, we have streets platted for street purposes, so we use them and they're for access to the homes. Some of them go to the bayside, and as you know, there's that little space. It's not a platted lot, but it's the end of the street. I don't think we should consider vacating them. My point is, I think we should look at each of these and make a policy. Do we want to vacate them, or do we want to put it more in a neighborhoods, parks kind of a thing? And then the Gulf ends of the streets, they happen to end on the beachfront, but don't forget, there's houses it's access to their house. People
Right.
call them a beach access, it's not. It's a neighborhood street
That's right.
that happens to end there. There's not a plotted lot there. It ends at the coastal construction line, there's no plotted lot there. And then, or you may have a buildable parcel within a neighborhood. And I know in your neighborhood, they've talked about that there's a buildable parcel, let's all buy it and do something and make a park. And there is a neighborhood that actually has something that they've created, or whatever. Or then you get the canals, you've got canal dredging, and then you've got the vacation of the canal frontage, okay? So to me, like, all we have to do is say, okay, yeah, these are the things we want to allow neighborhoods to do, and let the town manager and staff and legal tell us how we do that. So for canal dredging, are we going to let them do that? Yes. In the neighborhood program? Yes. Vacation of canal frontage only, not bayfront, not whatever, not the ends of beach streets, not whatever. Canal dredge, for me, canal front, yes, that we should pursue that. Give us the best process, give us the best legal process according to state. How can we do this the quickest and fit state guidelines, just for that only, not for every property.
I agree, that's what
You
I
know,
said.
so that's why I'm saying maybe we just say yay, nay to these different things. Ask staff to how you put that into a neighborhood parks project, how you redo the ordinance to accomplish these things, how they fund it, which is probably non-ad valorem taxes, and then go from there. But anyway, to me, it's just a quick way of having the conversation. I don't know if this is helpful or not.
The funding part of that, I found the ordinance number 2008-07, and it talks about funding just these types of things for streets, and special assessments, creation of assessments, and so that's already an ordinance of how to do
To
it.
me,
Could I-
to
no.
me, I'd say, yeah, they should be able to talk about landscaping, they should be able to talk about lighting, they should be able to talk about speed bumps, they should be able to talk about their street end at the bay if they want to do something, and we should let them all go together and decide they want to have their canal dredged and what that would be, create a process for that, and we should create a process for vacating along the canals. For me, that's yes, yes, yes on all those, that's just me.
I'd like to hear what Bruce has to say, if he has anything to add on this. If you don't, no big deal, because I agree with what Joanne just said. I have nothing else to add. I'd like to move on to the next item.
Not even sure what item we're talking about.
All right,
We're
never
talking about
mind.
vacation and neighborhood parks
Yeah,
and
but
stuff.
what's that got to do with dredging?
Well,
Vacation and
Well,
dredging. don't
dredging's
sound-
next on the list.
but the vacation, they just said, this isn't just about vacating canals, they're saying this is all public property. I'm saying, no, it's not, that we need to clearly define what it is. The canals, yes, end of the street at the bay, no. That's my
I'm good-
point.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I just didn't understand how dredging got involved in this
Were
conversation.
you clear on all that, Jason? Did that make sense to you? Did you, so do you want to see the layout? Okay.
But, if you go back to like landscaping and right-of-way, I mean, remember, like, a couple of us fought for landscaping on Hercules, but then the council voted no, not to let them do it.
But don't forget, the staff needs to bring it forward, because we have infrastructure now that we didn't have before. So that
Correct.
may be that we bring it forward after staff reviews it. We say, yeah, we're willing to discuss about that, but because it's in the comp plan, we think they should. bring it forward and say, but we can't because of this issue, this issue, this issue, and we'll say, okay, so we're
The
not
only thing
including
this
that.
does, or what this does, not the only, what it does, is separate out the issues. I mean, it's basically what Dennis and Joanne are saying. I think it's a good idea, and anybody else think it's a good idea?
Yeah, I think it's a good
Great.
idea. Go ahead before I finish.
And the council is taking up an important subject, but there's separate but related issues here. One, let me make it absolutely clear. You currently have in your code a two-step process through which anyone, including the town staff, can ask for public property to be vacated, okay? One of the things that is identified in the agenda memo is that there is a lengthy process, which is the one that most people go through, and then there's an abbreviated process, which is in subsection E of section 10-220 of the code. And that allows for an expedited process, an expedited vacating hearing process, if the council makes certain determinations. And so there's the issue of policy. Do we want to have a look at potentially the merits of vacating canal right-of-ways or certain classes of old plats and roads that are no longer used, et cetera, coupled with, for purposes of making it easier for everyone involved, making sure it falls within the criteria of subsection E to make it easier to process.
And see, sir, the point I was making is that of this list, like vacating the canal frontage, I would consider it de minimis, and I would create a de minimis process for that specific thing, because it impacts so many properties. Whereas for a street end piece of property, I would not make it de minimis. You know what I'm saying? That's the point I
Yeah,
was making.
I want to clarify, because some people may say, well, de minimis means minimum, but there's a lot of property owners. The canal situation that has been discussed repeatedly, I think is almost a category in of itself. There are a number of very old plats where the original developer created easements or right-of-way or ownership for things like utilities that we generally think of at the back of their property line, that was then dedicated to the town or Lee County initially. And not to get into too much, but a dedication on a plat is nothing more than the creator of that plat's offer to give property to the local government. Florida law then says that local government has to take affirmative action to accept ownership of that dedicated right-of-way or property before the dedication is complete. So in the case of, again, the canals, maybe Lee County took no affirmative steps to accept that dedication, and therefore the town can take the position it's never been accepted and it's not town property, and make a statement to that effect.
The lines are there. The property lines show that property on the other side of the line.
I understand the property lines. It doesn't mean that the necessary steps for the dedication took place. But the point there is that ultimately you make a determination that's no longer needed. It's so small, and even though it crosses 40 lots, it's still de minimis, because what's the need? Why does the town need that property that's a foot wide across 30 lots or 40 lots?
I love what you've said, and I agree. If that were possible, the easiest, start with the easiest and work up.
Bruce, what were you gonna say?
I was just going to say, why don't we just keep this simple and talk about the excess property behind the houses on the canals? You know, just keep it to that, and let's get through that, and then worry about all this other stuff.
That's not what's in the packet.
I know, but I
You
don't
want
care.
to,
I'm
you want to
just
go ahead
saying.
and make it tight. Okay, we're talking about the canal in Denora.
So what I'm hearing, let me just be clear, is that the council wants to proceed, I assume you want to proceed with vacating the land behind Denora.
I want the proper information so I know what I'm doing.
Hang on a second, when you say proper information, if that's what you want us to do, then I guess the question is, we're not gonna contact the property owners and say, Mary, Joe, Sam, do you want it back? We're just gonna say, hey, we're gonna look for a approach that basically says, boom, we file a particular piece of paperwork, congratulations, it's yours, good luck.
Mr. Heron, can we do that? Because when I looked at statute, it says the property owner abutting it has to accept it.
Well, by operation of law, it automatically goes to them.
Florida statute, it says that they have, the abutting property owners, you can't make them take it. I mean, I imagine they'd want it, but then the other thing you gotta look at is, how does that affect the guy across the canal? Because now you've made their canal smaller.
Exactly, that's the unintended consequences of the information we need to have.
You're not making the canal any smaller.
You are.
The canal is still the canal.
that's true.
Seawall to
Dennis is right.
seawall is still the same.
He's right.
You're not shrinking the canal.
That's right, but the
Public
regulation for putting in a dock says you must have this much footage from the property line. So now the property line has grown out and it's minimized that footage.
That's my
So-
concern.
Basically, they're taking it, at least that's the way they did with my dock. They're taking it from the seawall to the other seawall. They're not looking at the property line.
Well, if that's how they did it up and down the thing, then fine. That's
I'm just saying,
They
that's
did
what they
mine
did
per,
for mine.
they
That's
did
all
mine
was
per
doing.
plat.
They
Could
didn't
we
do mine for
resolve
flat.
this? Have we come to any resolution on this?
No, that's why we're discussing it.
Well, I want to do it. I say
I
yes.
say yes.
I do the Denora side street and
Yes.
do that as a.
Bring the
trial.
Denora
That's our
stuff to
start.
us. Bring us the Denora
We will,
Canal.
we will look at first the Denora and any other canals that fall in a similar situation to
We'll be
Denora.
looking at every
All
canal
of
on the
Well,
That's
if that's
okay,
the
that's
policy
great.
direction
Start
of the
with Denora.
council.
But
We'll
we'll
start
start
there.
with Denora, and then we can make a policy decision how we want to handle it moving
Okay.
forward. So bring us the stuff, as the mayor said, for Denora to start
And
with.
that's canal, the canal front only, not
Right.
bayside, anything. Good.
Okay, should you guys want to move on to the next item?
Yes.
Okay. Discuss, develop a methodology for canal maintenance and other neighborhood improvements.
Okay, so that's then this.
Then we're going back to Joanne's list
That's
previous.
what my idea was. You don't have to go to it, it was just
When I
my
read it, I
reference.
knew it had to do with both of them, so.
So the canal dredging, way back when we did a canal dredging down towards your end there, Bruce, off of Buccaneer.
Yeah.
The town paid for the engineering, if I remember correctly, and the residents did all chipped in
assessment, special
assessment to do the dredging.
Yep.
I think that's as good of a starting point for anybody that wants their canal dredged. Is we can, or not, we can offer the town will do the engineering, and the residents will have to get, and then I would suggest we have to have a threshold of the number of residents on the canal that want to dredge it. There's a lot of people on my canal that don't have docks or lifts or anything. So they may say, well, what do I care if the canal is dredged or not? They don't realize, obviously, their property value is going to be higher if they have a nice, deep canal. But I think, what do you want? 75% of the canal owners say, we want to get it dredged, in order for us to say, okay, we'll pay for the engineering, you do the actual special assessment for it. You want to do 50%, you want to do 80%, I'm just using I pick a number. You're never going to get 100%, so that's unrealistic. So the question becomes, what percentage of the owners on the canal, on either side of the canal, must agree to have the canal dredged?
I'd say it has to be more than 50%, but I wouldn't go much higher than that. I'd 55, 60%, something like that.
I would think you have to have a majority, which would be over
Right.
50%. But anything over 50%, I think we just need to start with that to give us a starting point.
I support everything you've said, other than I'd like to have conversation about who pays for the engineering? Because who owns these canals? Whose benefits from
Well,
it? Is it
that's-
really
well, that's-
everybody?
That's an issue
Is-
that we've got going right
is-
now.
Is everybody, should people that don't live on canals be paying for that engineering?
That's right.
For the benefit, property benefit of the canal
That's
front
a
owners?
policy decision we'll have to make. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just telling you how we did it the first time.
Right.
That's what we did the first time.
That's my
I
only
mean-
objection. Other than that, it's great, go for it.
And just to add to Laguna Shores, what Dennis was referring to, the engineering was done outside of Laguna Shores. It was to take it from Laguna Shores to Big Carlos Pass.
Right.
It was not dredging within Laguna Shores. And Laguna Shores body of water is the natural aquatic preserve, and it needed to be flush, but anyhow, it's.
So that is different then.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
like it was a
It
precedent.
was somewhat different, yeah. There's no question about that. And your statement about who owns the canals, we haven't never got an answer from that yet. Tetra Tech said the state owns them. Because I brought that question up during the Bay Beach stormwater thing. Because Bay Beach says they keep all their stormwater on their property, but they have a big pipe that's discharging right out into the canal.
Well, I like the
So-
methodology that the town manager, let's see, what page is that, sorry. Page 63, was it, Roger? Was it you that? Just to move this along, I support what these two have said. I personally think the engineering should be borne by those who benefit
Yeah, I
from
agree.
it.
I don't have a
But
problem with that, you
what,
know.
Roger, what you wrote on, starting on 63, 64, is that what you're looking at in terms of special taxing district, that we would be saying yes as a policy direction? We would be saying proceed kind of along that line?
Well, generally, yes. Let me just for everyone's benefit, say that a certain number, bless you,
Thank you.
a certain number of the public, percentage to be determined, who would benefit from the improvement, whatever the improvement is. In this case, we're talking about canal dredging as an example, would come forward and say, look, we're interested in canal dredging. And forget about, let's just say, for Vanessa, let's assume the town is paying 100% design and the actual work. But we want to use the town as a funding mechanism. Town fronts the money and they pay us back over time. So then they come to council. Council said, sounds like a good idea. Staff, go ahead and do a formal report, because now we're investing staff time into it. Go ahead and do a formal report and get quotes and get prices together and get what it would take to accomplish this. What would be the interest rate on the financing, et cetera, et cetera. Bring that report back to us. We bring the report back to council. Council says, you know what, everything still sounds good. Well, let's put it out to the affected residents and see if X percentage, now that they know what they would actually have to pay, $100 per month over 10 years, whatever it winds up being, still are interested in doing it. And then some percentage say yes, some percentage say no, and then based on that vote, if it crosses the percentage threshold that the council sets, the project would go forward.
I think,
So that's kind of the procedural concept that I was thinking about.
and I agree with most of that, except I would put the percentage, let's just say 60% as an initial thing. So when you bring it back, we're saying, okay, we need 60% of the canal owners to approve it, and they're going to pay for all of the costs involved. That way, once that gets out there, because there's enough people that want their canals dredged, that they're going to come back and give us their feedback on what they think the percentage should be or not be, and who should pay what costs and all that thing. So I think to start with, we say, okay, for a canal to get dredged, we need 60%. And again, that's just an open number that we can change later, but at least it's a starting point.
Can I just make a comment? In this ordinance I told you about, this is all laid out. It's already here. It tells you how to do this. It tells you if you're going to do something for a neighborhood, how you go about doing it, how you assess it, the cost, how you get the cost, how you advertise it, how you have a public hearing.
And the
So
ordinance is number,
it's 2008-07. It's already laid out how you do this. All the costs that would be incurred, so that every property owner knows what their assessment's going to be. I mean, I'll give it to you. It's all here. We don't have to rewrite it. It's done. Just
What's
saying.
the section of the code?
Here, it's an ordinance.
What's the majority number on it?
Does it have a majority number in it, Tracy?
It's not a majority number, it's all, excuse me. It basically says like all people that would benefit would be noticed, and then you'd hold a public hearing, and they all come, you hear the testimony, then the town council makes a decision.
There's,
There might, I was just skimming through it, there might be more.
yeah, let me, I think that there's a significant difference between what the manager is suggesting and what the ordinance provides for. As I understand it, the manager's talking about a process by which is allowed by law, for the creation of what is generally called a municipal service taxing unit, which is a process that ultimately also has to be approved by the county. And they're very common with new developments and other where capital improvements are needed to put in street lighting, roads, et cetera. In this instance, dredging and maintaining a canal for the benefit of the adjacent property owners. The ordinance that you've provided, 2008-07, allows for, and it's what's called a master special assessment ordinance, which allows for the establishment of special assessments. There are pretty significant differences between one and the other. The taxing unit is created again by ordinance. People vote on it, and it's allowed. A special assessment is different.
I want to interrupt for a second. My understanding, and maybe I've got it wrong, is that the municipal service taxing unit is not allowed in Lee County for municipalities. It's only in unincorporated Lee County. I may have that wrong, but Lee County is a little unique in that, I think.
You're right, they have to approve it, and they don't. That's the problem. They're not going to approve to fund it.
It does have to be approved by the county in which you're located, and it is provided for if the county has adopted a policy saying that they are not going to allow for or approve the establishment of municipal service taxing units in incorporated areas, that's a different issue.
There were
So
issues,
then,
and that's why that
if we
ordinance was
want to
created.
accomplish this, what would you recommend we do? How do we do it? What do we need to do?
Well, if you go the special assessment process, and the manager certainly, I believe, will confirm this, you have to do a rate study, you have to do certain public hearings, you have to adopt a master assessment role, and as long as the assessment is active, you have to adopt or readopt the assessment process on a yearly basis, whereas the MSTU process is just once.
But the MSTU is almost unreachable, that's the problem.
Yeah,
The special assessment is good, and the reason that it's a little longer to get it done is because we're taking care of taxpayer money. We have to make sure that we are finding in favor of the taxpayer.
You do that with an MSTU as well, don't get me wrong. There are
we can
certain
do that.
minimum requirements of certain findings that have to be made, an identification of what the capital cost is, how it's going to be apportioned amongst the owners that live within the MSTU, et cetera. And so in that respect, it's similar to a special assessment, but there are additional steps and additional things that need to be done with a special assessment that you do not have to do necessarily with an MSTU.
I think to Bruce's point is MSTU is almost out. I mean, it's like, why are we talking about that one? We're most likely not going to be able to do it. We might as well go towards something we know we can do.
Well, notwithstanding the technical difference between the two, procedurally, they're approximately the same thing. The only really difference, as John mentioned, is that when you form the district as a special taxing district, it's a one and done. And when it's done through these municipal service districts, then it's an annual assessment that has to be done. But,
What is your preference?
well, clearly one and done would be simpler, but if we know that we're going to meet resistance at the county level, we have a limiting factor that we have to deal with. But that being what it is, once you get past that hump, pretty much the process is the same for all intents and purposes. So,
Pretty big hump, though, to get over.
well, if you're not gonna, if we kind of know what the,
We've done it. I mean, this is not like this is new.
no,
science
we
or-
could do it, but I guess,
But which one,
I guess
MSTU or
the
special
point, the
benefit?
real point
That's what-
is,
But they're talking about MSTU.
no, but I don't know that
Tell
I
'em.
really met, I'm sorry. I don't know that that's really my issue, to be honest with you. Clearly, if we had a neighborhood who came in today and said, we wanted to do X canal dredging, using that example, how many people kick off that process? And B, how many people make that final decision that it's a go? We need to know that. I heard 60% bantered about earlier. And then, let's see if someone, a neighborhood comes in and says, hey, we actually want to do this or not. Clearly, we've only had one in, 20 years? So we'll see if anybody else comes in and wants to try to get it done through that process.
Well, at this point, how much more do you need from us than that?
Nothing, if we're saying.
We want to do it, and you guys are the guys that have the legal
I'm just saying
knowledge
is that
to help us
60%
accomplish
is,
it.
the kickoff is, because we are going to be spending staff time and resources, et cetera, on this, so you don't want to go slowly through it and then at the final decision, have the thing lose 49-51 because somebody's spent all this time and effort to get there.
Do you
want to have a
wanna-
little cushion so that if you lose some people, when they see the cost, you still have enough who kind of want to see it through.
Roger, didn't you have a process that you gave us earlier a year
It's
ago?
all
when
similar.
it
Yes,
said
I
go
did. It's
talk
all-
to them, get their inputs, and then
It's
give them
all
costs?
pretty much part and parcel
Yeah,
of the same thing. The
that's
only
fine.
question continues to be, what threshold do you want to set to sort of kick off the process? Is that the 60% number I think someone threw out? And then is the final decision stay at 60% or is it goes back down to 50 plus 1, 50% plus 1?
I'd say start at 60 and the final process goes to 50% plus 1.
Yep. Well, I'm sure the neighbors, the people on the canal is gonna let us know what they think the proper percentage should be.
I don't know the answer to that proper percentage. I'm not.
I don't either,
I'm not
but I-
willing to put because you might have a canal that's full of vacation rentals and they don't care, but then you've got 4 or 5 people who've lived there all their lives and they're like, I can't afford that. And so I would take that into consideration when I'm making a decision.
There's two approaches to this. You have certain things that are resident or property owner initiated, and that's what we're kind of talking about today, I think for the most part. There's a different case that I think perhaps the mayor is alluding to, and that is a case where the town's determining that something has to be done, and the town's determining it's going to be done through this process, and that the property owners are going to be assessed. So that's an action initiated by the town, and that may be in a case where, something needs to be done, and using the example the mayor was citing, that there may be out-of-town owners or vacation rentals or some other factor where the people don't want to bear the expense, but the town still feels it's so important that it needs to be done that we're going to impose it. But I see those as sort of a variance of two similar ways to get things done, but I don't know that there'd be very many cases where the town would impose it.
I think the owner's gotta come forward to say, we want our canal dredged.
Okay, I think I have enough information at the 60, if there's consensus at the 60 for initial and 50.1 at the final to,
And then the discussion was, you said, and other neighborhood improvements, and that's what that little list was. Then, do we want to allow the neighborhoods to discuss lighting, landscaping, speed bumps, neighborhood parks, or
I
not?
think we have to. It's already in the.
It's their neighborhoods.
It's in the comp plan. We're
Well,
already
I
supposed to.
agree, but we have to state that out loud. in a-
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
But
so
like the speed bumps on Palermo, but you also can't do it, but even though the comp plan encourages it.
Be a similar process.
well, let's be clear
The
about.
landscaping in the right of way on Palermo got ripped out without even asking the neighbors.
On a second, now you bring into other issues that are different, so let's clarify those. With respect to the speed bumps, that's a case where where people are asking us to introduce speed bumps for speed control on the local street. We don't believe that it's, the first course of action is to put in speed bumps. We have other traffic calming things that we believe are more appropriate to try. We may find out that those fail and have to go to speed bumps. At that point in time, the council may determine that it's a serious enough problem that the town wants to pay for it, or avail those people of this process that we're talking about today. Yet to be determined.
What other options do we have? Have we let the neighbors know that we're looking at other options besides speed bumps?
Roger did, he.
Yes.
I'm just asking.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. We met with them
Okay.
on site and went over those, and those are underway.
Okay, that's
Okay.
fine. So I just want to make sure we,
As it pertains to trimming, which is the second thing, and I'm sorry to digress, there's two types of trimming that we do. There's trimming where it's bad and we can notice the owner and give them time to do it. And there's trimming that, we view that it's a safety problem, needs to be taken care of immediately. Our preference is clearly, and in the case that it happened, our preference would be for the owner to do it, so we don't have to spend town resources to do it. Give them a notice and give them an opportunity to do it themselves. Only if they don't do it, then we do it. And I don't know that that was done in that particular case. I'm still looking into it. But my note to the staff upon receiving those emails was that giving notice is always a good idea.
But the one side, you worked with them and it worked out great. It was the other side there was an issue with.
I hear you. Okay, but going back to whether this should be covering all types of improvements, or shall we predetermine today whether it's only this and not that? Under the process that we're talking about, I want to remind you, we have at least a minimum of 2 times it's going to come in front of council, a minimum of 2. So that means that if you don't think the improvement that's being proposed should go through this process, you will have a minimum of 2 opportunities to say, no, we don't want to do it that way, we want to do it some other way. And that could be the town pays for it, that means we don't want to do it at all, we don't like it, or whatever the case may be. So I'm not really concerned about putting a limit on the front-end ideas, because the council will have 2 opportunities to consider what improvement a neighborhood may want to do and see if it makes sense.
Your question's done?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This was in our strategic plan.
Yes.
We talked about neighborhood quality of life, and I feel like we've got this underway. So thank you. Thank you for.
We're going to take a quick break.
I don't need one.
I
That's because I just went.
was just going to say that.
Oh, you were sitting
While we
there?
were talking, I looked on the county website. They won't-
You didn't see him leave? I was watching him in the hallway. I'm
They very
like, now he makes me
specifically
have to
say
go to the
so.
bathroom. called me.
Let's go. Let's get the show.
Joanne, are you almost ready? Thank you. We finished that, right? We finished that, right?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
finished
did.
that. Moving on.
I'm waiting
And that
for,
was a big one. That was big for the neighborhood.
Construction, parking, and right-of-way.
very important.
Madam Mayor?
Town attorney?
No? Well, I have a question while we're waiting for the town attorney to come back.
Okay.
We had a note from a previous meeting that the council wanted Tetra Tech to be here. They're here if you have any questions for them. I don't know. I think it goes back to.
I think I was the one that asked them to be here because I'm still trying to find an answer on who owns the water in the canals.
So rather than keep them waiting, do you want
Bring
to
them
bring
on
them in and see if we
Yes,
can
thank
get that,
you.
please, Michelle?
That was the reason I had asked.
Okay,
for it.
3:45, the break is over.
I'm good.
I'm waiting on Tetra Tech. I guess the break's not over.
Yes,
Within
3E is on the
45
agenda.
minutes, I have
What?
got to leave.
3E on the agenda?
yes. Oh, yes, I know. Yeah.
If we don't finish it, we move to the next one.
We can,
Can we move on to vehicles on town right-of-way, and when he comes in, we can talk about that?
Yeah, that works. Let's do that.
okay, so discuss vehicles parking on town roadways and rights-of-ways. The backgrounds of town is not addressed, the lack of space on residential property for construction vehicles, off-site construction staging during development. Based on the current town code, staff has utilized the town standard square foot per year prorate rate for vehicles parking the town roadway and rights-of-ways. I'm not sure that that's the answer to charge people. The problem is they're blocking the road.
Right. I have called Roger on more than one occasion. On Estero Boulevard, they got all them trucks parked on the property. They're sticking out into the the little bit of bike path you have. People can't get around them. They gotta go out into the road to get around them.
But it's like, it's island-wide. We got people in Fairview Isles are complaining, people down in my end are complaining. I mean, last year it was Palermo. It's constant.
Well, yeah, they need, in my estimation, they need to stage their vehicles off-site somewhere and bring them in a work van or whatever to
So
get
that's
them
the
there.
discussion. What do you want to do about it?
It's not just construction vehicles, it's just vehicles. And in my opinion, if a vehicle is obstructing the road, whether it's Estero or Jefferson Street, they have to move, period. They can't lease that space, they can't use that space, they get ticketed or they move if they're obstructing the road. Otherwise, if they're not obstructing the road, because we live in such a constrained space, then what's the deal? I mean, if somebody is parked, for example, I had yesterday, coming down my street, there was a big van with lots of people parked at my neighbor's house. Are they parked on the town road or part on the town road? Yes. Were they obstructing the road? No. It's no big deal.
So on a street like my street is 20 feet wide, it's anything is obstructed.
If they're obstructing the road, they're obstructing the road. If you can't get around them,
So what do you do about a house that's being built and they have construction trucks?
are they obstructing the road?
Yes.
Then they need to move.
But where do you put the trucks?
Well, that's not my problem.
I guess that's,
It's not.
but see, the problem is the parking ordinance that was adopted doesn't say that. It says that they can be there. That's the problem.
They can't obstruct the road. There's nothing in the ordinance that says they can obstruct the road.
It's, where was,
Obstruct the road, can't park by the fire.
Instead of talking
side,
about
fire
right-of-way, we need to talk
hydrant.
about obstruction.
so Roger, how do you deal with that then? I mean, is that enough for you to answer? No. I didn't think so.
So, the council led off this discussion about saying all the cases where people were blocking things. So, we agree that people should not be blocking things. So we need to think about what alternative we can offer them.
Ticket.
Okay, well, that's one alternative. The other alternative is where it is feasible, where there is room, where there is a place for them to park and not block traffic, to allow them to use that space under the town's parking regulations is what we're proposing. So that's what we think is, considering the constraints, we think that's a reasonable solution.
Talking about two different things, Roger. This says, discuss vehicles parking on the town roadways and right-of-ways. That could be anybody. The construction issue is a different issue. I mean, if you can figure out how to give ABC Construction the ability to park their vehicles, in the conversation that you and I had where you gave them the right to and they still parked in the street, if you can figure that out for them, fantastic, great. But I'm talking about the everyday use of the roadway. Again, I'll use my Christmas party, for example. If I've got 15 cars jammed into my driveway and 3 have half of their car in the roadway and they're not obstructing traffic, there shouldn't be a problem with that.
But you're not allowed to park on the roadway per the ordinance.
Well,
True.
so let's talk about one case at a
disagree.
time. So the case, if my memory serves me correctly, this was precipitated by Councilor Butch's question about how are we handling the situation. So on a very narrow issue of construction vehicles, not someone having a party, not the lawn guy who's there for a half an hour, but when someone's there for 6, 8, 9, 10 months, parking and blocking the road, how do we deal with that? And so I'm taking it from your comments that if we could find a solution where there's a safe place that they could park on the road, that we're going to allow them to park on the road and charge the applicable fees like anybody else we would charge who parked on town property. That's what we're saying here.
So I look at it differently. I'm thinking that when they come in to get a permit, that there should be a parking plan attached to that permit, that they tell the town, this is how we're going to conduct this business for the next 6 months. Or whether they're putting in a dock, whatever it is they're doing, part of the application, like they do it in Naples, part of the process is you have to have a parking plan. You're going to tell us where your construction vehicles are going to be,
I'm good with that.
you know?
And worked on that before, right? Off-site?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. I think I brought it.
So do you see a problem with doing something like that?
Yes, because pretty much, notwithstanding what they would submit to us in a plan that might look good on paper,
Exactly.
we know based on the size of the structures and the setbacks that they're using on most of these lots, they're going to hit a point in time where they're not going to be able to get the vehicles on that parcel. You know, by the time you're doing drywall, electrical, plumbing, and whatever, you have the GC and 3 or 4 trades out there, and the concrete block structure is pretty much, yeah, they can get 1 or 2 in the driveway, or maybe even 3, but then after that, they're out of room.
They need to take that in consideration when they do it.
So you're talking about releasing the space. I'm not trying to make money off of this. I'm trying to make a public safety, not an issue.
Well, by leasing it, we're controlling where they are and controlling where they can't be. That's why we're doing it. It's not the money, it's really as much as it's providing hey, you can park there, but you can't park there, because that's a safe place. A is a safe place and B is not a safe place.
What if there's not a safe, like,
We would tell them that there is no safe place. I mean, if there is.
Because I know that
You may have to
because-
park 3 blocks away and walk, or drop somebody off and go park their car.
I know you guys are working at the end of my street because of people parking there to go to the hot dog place, and there's near misses there. So there's just no safe place on that area unless you pull into somebody's driveway. But then there's other
Every
streets
set
that
of
are bigger.
circumstances is different, pretty much. It's a case-by-case basis.
So this came to us back in 2016 as an issue, and I still don't feel like we're having to resolve.
Well, the other thing is, you could try to go to a process where you say to people, if you don't have enough space based on our review of your building plans, that you have to go show us you have an off-site parcel that you're going to use for staging and your vehicles as a part of giving out a permit. And frankly, we have enough complications and, with getting people to submit the right paperwork for permits. I don't know if we want to add in that further complication or not, but.
I agree with Tracy. I think there should be a parking plan. I really do. I mean, there's no reason that as a builder, the GC should know what's going on. And they do not have to schedule the electrician, the plumber, the AC guy, and the roofer all on the same day.
No, the problem, the council might not know this, is like, at the end of Primo, the advanced disposal couldn't get there for 3 weeks straight because construction trucks were there and there was nobody there for them to come get. So they took pictures to show the town, we can't get to our customers because of this blockage. 3 weeks, the recyclables got built up because of this.
Right, but let's just be clear for the record that after 3 weeks, they told us about it rather than telling us about it.
Exactly.
that
Yeah,
day.
but the neighbors were telling you about it.
They didn't tell me. I don't know, maybe they told someone on set, but they didn't tell me.
See, well, then we have a communication problem.
Perhaps.
Bruce, what's your opinion here?
When I read the code, it says landscaping and construction vehicles must be off the roadway to the extent reasonably possible with bright cones indicating they are immobile and must not impede the sideline. I didn't see anything wrong with that.
Where are you, Bruce?
I agree
Number
with-
5, 142.
I agree with you there, Bruce, to an extent. If they're off to the road as far as they can go and they're on the person's property they're servicing, that's fine, as long as it doesn't impede traffic. But if they're on the neighbor's property,
That's right.
That's a different story.
And what's going to happen on a cul-de-sac, there's no room
That's right.
to
There.
put cars in front of the construction site, because the construction site's maybe 30 feet wide.
Right.
So you got to go down the street, maybe 100 feet, 200, whatever. Primo is a different is it Primo? Primo,
Are you talking about Primo or Palermo, which street?
your street.
Primo.
That street may be.
number one street on
That
the
may
island.
be a different problem because it's super narrow. But I'm talking about down there in Fairview Isles, that street's just, nearly as wide as this room. It's a big street.
Well, we
There's
get a lot
plenty
of
room.
complaints down there.
That's because they're parking on the cul-de-sac and they're not moving
Correct.
down in front of the neighbors. If they moved down in front of the neighbors, there wouldn't have been any problem,
So here's,
in my opinion.
but we can put these rules here and tell them to move. What I'm trying to stop is the neighbors getting so upset day after day after day because it's not good for their health. I mean, it's an issue that doesn't stop. And every single day, these same neighborhoods, island-wide, are having these issues. And they're like, my God, why does my blood pressure have to go up every day? It's not fair to them.
So the question in hand is, and I think Councilor Butcher made the point, I think you all should read the language in number 5. It says, must be off the roadway.
Reasonable.
To the extent reasonably possible.
Reasonably possible.
And that reasonable it depends on it's subjective.
What number 5 needs
As long
to
as
be
they can
added
drive
to
by, you're
is to
fine.
have, and cannot impede, this says indicating that they are immobile and must not impede the site triangle, but it also needs to say it must not impede traffic flow.
Is there
Or-
a legal
or
width that must be
entrance and
maintained
egress.
for access?
Attorney?
There's, you have to look at the entire regulation in context, and in some instances requires you going back and forth. I, for purpose of this conversation, about the language in the code regarding construction and maintenance vehicles, you still need to go back to what is prohibited. And in section 28-20, page 141 of your packet, subsection 2N, it is prohibited to stop, stand, or park a vehicle in a manner that obstructs the free use of the streets by other vehicles, impedes proper parking by any other vehicle, or impedes traffic flows on the streets. So, you have to take those two code sections together and, okay, so to the extent reasonable. But if you have done whatever is reasonable and it still violates 2N, then there's just not enough space there for you to park there safely in a reasonable manner. And therefore, you're in violation, could be certainly argued, of section 2822N and subject to a citation.
I can agree with all that, but then what begs the question is, how do we enforce that? What do these homeowners that are being under siege by all these construction vehicles and stuff parked all over the place in their driveways, along the streets you can't get by? How do they make that complaint to the town to get it resolved today?
Without them having to call every single day, over and over, and
Right,
fighting
but I
with the
said
construction
today.
workers.
Well, there's two things that happen. So let's just say we got a call today. We would go out there and we would we give the construction vehicles one warning, saying you can't do this, you do this again, you're gonna get a ticket. And if they did it the next day, yeah, we might, hopefully we would go back and check now that we know that there's an issue, but there might necessitate a call or not, but hopefully it wouldn't. We would go back and check and see that the people are complying with the directive they received the prior day. In the case of, that we were dealing with, the person said, well, oh man, what can I do? You know, I can't fit them on the property all the time. And we said, okay, well, look, we found 2 spaces in the immediate area of the construction that the person could park that we didn't feel would impede traffic under the end clause that John Heron just read to you all. And then comes the question of, do we make them come in and get a public works permit like we would make anybody else who was using public property to park, or we don't? We did. That was that case. In terms of what do we use to sort of view impeding, you know, how does that translate into real life? We look at basically a 14-foot clearance, which is basically, I would say, the minimum width for a fire truck to get down the road. So if there's so we would want to make sure that if a vehicle was partially on the road, but we would want to make sure there was at least 14 feet of clear space to get past, so that.
On the road, or what if they have to drive on somebody else's?
The problem is your mailbox is here, the next guy's mailbox is there, the next guy's mailbox is there, or their tree, or their whatever, so it's basically 14 feet of clear pavement.
I guess the other question would be, okay, you're saying somebody calls and complains. The vehicle's blocking the road, people can't get by or whatever. So you send base or somebody down there to tell the contractor, hey, you gotta move this vehicle, you're blocking the road. And then you're saying, well, then we go back the next day and check. Well, the contractor said to you, okay, we'll move it, we'll have it moved in 5 minutes. Does somebody go back in an hour to see if they actually did move it?
Not unless somebody calls.
In some cases they do, in some cases they don't. I'm not going to say in every single case that they do, but sometimes it depends on what else is going on, or whatever, but they generally will try to go back and check.
Because I'll be honest with you, I don't care about the contractor.
Well, they usually don't leave until the guy moves the car, so they usually stay till the guy moves the car.
If it's moved before they leave, that's one thing.
They generally do
But if the guy
that.
says, hey, you know, we'll have it moved within 10 minutes.
No, we
okay?
usually stay and make sure they
And you
move it.
guys leave, they need to go back within an hour to make sure it got moved, because I don't care about the contractor's inconvenience. I
We
care
do-
about
we-
the residents' inconvenience.
Yeah, we generally stay till it's
So we need to
moved.
double check.
So the other thing, though, I think it's really important, is that when you give out a permit, there should be something on that permit the contractor signs that he knows that they're he's read our parking, or something that says to him, to the contractor, I've read the parking ordinance, I know that I can't block it. What's so hard about sticking that on the permit?
We can, but that's
the
not really the
application.
issue, because they've already discussed all that with us at that point.
I doubt they discuss with you parking when they come in to get a permit.
No, oh, you're talking about the regular building permit.
When they
I
come
thought
in
you
to get
meant
their
the parking
application,
permit.
no, when they come in to get the application and they're gonna build a house, or they're gonna remodel my kitchen, somewhere on that application that they sign, or when you get the
That
permit.
we can look at doing.
Just add it on there that they understand that they can't block, that way they're acknowledging that they know the code and they can't block. So when base goes out there and be like, it's right there, dude.
We could add that, we could take a look and add that to the permit stamp.
Okay, so do we agree with what Mr. Heron said, that N and 5 plus Rogers' addition of off-site parking for contractors solves this issue?
Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
Wait a minute, I don't, because the reason why, and you can tell me how you're gonna fix this has been here since 2016, and the problem exists today.
Well, I would say this, Mayor, that the reason this is on the agenda is because we actually applied a fix in a particular case, and the contractor was upset that A, they had to pay for parking, and B, they were getting tickets when they weren't parking in their designated spots or were blocking the road. So that's what kind of precipitated this getting on the agenda. So I'm not going to speak for what's happened in the past, but as we're getting these issues reported to us today, we are trying to resolve them either through voluntary compliance, a parking permit or citations if necessary. We just can't be on every street every day checking. We know we
Right,
have to
so
respond to
the other
complaints.
question is, Roger, that you haven't stated was how much you charged the guy initially to park.
Right, so when it was originally calculated, it was calculated, and the parking folks use a standard parking space. And they have a certain dimension, I don't know what it is off the top of my head. And that calculated on a per square foot basis, it came to X. And the contractor objected to that amount, so we went back and measured his vehicles and actually brought the amount down. So he said, okay, we'll only charge you per square foot of your vehicles per a standard vehicle versus a standard vehicle.
Just to digress for a second, that guy that was here from Wins today, I was looking at his contract was, and he talking about $500 a square, or parking spot, but we're saying, or he was saying half was his own and half was owned by us.
That's,
That was
the
probably
rate's
muddy.
the same, but the circumstances are different.
You got everything you need there, Roger?
If, this was on to answer your question, so if all your questions have been answered, yes.
You need, this ordinance needs to be amended to offer off-site parking. In other, Roger's idea of here, you've got off-site parking. Oh, maybe you don't need to amend the ordinance to do that. Here's the ordinance, and you either meet it or you have Roger's alternative.
Roger, will you add something to the application of the permit so that they have to sign something about the parking?
Well, it'll be on the permit application, we'll try to get it on that.
Something on there?
That's good.
I think that will be a good start.
I have a couple more questions.
Go ahead,
before we
Bruce.
Vacate here.
I'd like to hear from
So
you.
2822, parking for certain purposes prohibited. If I have my own car and I park it on the street, I'm allowed to do that?
As long as you aren't impeding traffic
Can you do that?
and, so long as you meet E and N, or 5 and E, or N, 5 and N.
So Counselor, just to kind of help you, we can never write these ordinances to eliminate discretion. So our discretion is, for example, if you have a lawn service company and they're there for 30 or 40 minutes and they're not blocking the road, but they're on the pavement, generally we would let them be, okay? Conversely, if you have a housekeeper 5 times a week and you have a 2-car parking driveway and you tell the person, well, I don't want my housekeeper parking in the driveway, so if I decide to go out and get lunch, she's not blocking me and I have to ask her to move my car, and going to have him or her parking their car in the road all the time, then probably we would say something. So
Why? If she's not blocking the road, if she is abiding by N and 5,
because
why would you
unfortunately,
cite
most
her?
of the streets do not have that 14 feet of clearance.
Okay, so you would only do it, though, if she's not abiding by N and 5.
Right, and N and 5, the math behind N and 5 is 14 feet of clearance of the roadway.
It doesn't say that anywhere.
Well, I'm just telling you how we're applying it. If you want to make it 10 feet, then we will codify that, or you can tell me that as a policy decision.
Roger, is somebody measuring this, or can we not just use simple common sense and say, I can get around them or I can't?
The answer is that we're saying that 14 feet is necessary for an emergency vehicle, and that's why we're using 14 feet.
Roger, 14 feet, did somebody tell you that, or is that a number you came up with? Because when they did the Times Square, I remember Roxanne had asked the question, when you were going to put tables, this was years ago, but when you're going to put tables and chairs, how much room do you need? And she was told 20 feet for emergency vehicles to get through Times Square.
Typically it's 22,
So why
okay.
do you say 14?
because I've had conversations not with our fire chief, with other fire chiefs in the past, and they've told me that they can squeeze through at 14. But we can make it 22 if that's what you want to do.
I don't understand that, because the lane widths on Estero Boulevard are either 10 feet or 11 feet. So I don't see how you can't get a 14-foot truck
I'm
down.
not,
10
I'm not
feet
sure
wide.
Jefferson Street is 14 feet wide. I just don't know how you, I don't know, you know,
I will contact the chief of the fire district and ask him the width of their vehicles, and we'll adjust accordingly.
Let's just use some common sense in this thing, that's all.
Or put it
I
on the
would hope that
application.
if somebody, if
I
the
agree.
fire truck was coming down my street and there was a car in their way, I hope they would mow them down.
I know,
I
right?
mean, it's, if that's such a rare occasion as opposed to the housekeeper example, or the pool guy, or the constant visitor, I mean, you know, I guess I've lived on an island long enough that I know you make accommodations. There is no perfect rule. You just make accommodations because we're living in a confined space.
Clearly,
Anyway,
clearly
whatever.
that could be the policy decision. You know, I think that we try to deal with these issues as they come up, try to use appropriate discretion in dealing with these issues. And we will continue to try to work with everyone involved to the extent that we maintain a safety, which is our obligation.
Everybody good to move on, or Bruce, do you have more questions? Okay. Moving on, we are to E, discuss review triggers for a special event permit as set forth in the code. Oh, the Tetra Tech, I'm sorry, we were
yeah.
waiting on Tetra Tech.
Can you tell us who owns the water in the canals?
Oh, there he is. I didn't see you sitting
Who
back
owns the
there.
mud in the canals?
Just put your name for the record.
Sure. Tim Vanderwalker with Tetra Tech for the
Nice
record.
to see you, Tim.
Thank you. So the question has come up regarding the canals adjacent to the property surrounding, or the property of Bay Beach in that neighborhood.
But it would
Any
reflect
canal.
any canal.
Any canal,
Who
correct,
owns the
correct.
waters in the canals? Because that thing in Bay Beach goes into the canal.
God.
So this would fall under sovereign submerged lands, is our understanding of it. So it would be the waters of the state, which controls any tidally influenced land. Our review of the plat did not show any dedication to other property, other entities, or anything platted with regard to Bay Beach owning that as well.
About Bay Beach, we're just
Or-
talking about
right.
artificial canals is what we're talking about.
Right.
They're different, though.
Not the one at Bay Beach.
No, but he said we're not talking about Bay Beach.
It's not specifically,
But
we're
I'm
talking
just
about
saying.
artificial canals.
Yes, so it would be based on a review of the plat, and tidal waters are under the jurisdiction of the state.
So what you're saying then is the state is the one that should dredge the canals.
No, what he's saying is that generally, it's the state that is in charge of the water.
Correct. So
Because
the
we didn't
state,
ask
and
you
then
about the
there's also
ground.
permitting through the Corps that happens as well.
Because I know that there are some canals that are privately owned, and the public can still navigate the waters, but they can't put structures into the ground because they're privately owned.
Correct.
Yeah,
So these are questions that are more suited for attorneys.
right.
So.
Oh, you have one specific question though, right?
Well, the question is if they're discharging their stormwater into the canal, that means they are not maintaining all of their stormwater on their property, correct?
Yeah, I wouldn't consider it the same issue since
Not.
they're discharging into the canal, which is connected to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a tidally influenced water body. So once it reaches that discharge point, then, and that's the discharge point that's a part of the permit, as part of the stormwater permit that they have. So that's all, that's what's been designated as where their system stops, and it goes from there.
Well, keep in mind also that many of the, not many, but I'm assuming a certain number of the lots in question that you're talking about probably predate the existence of Swift Mud or stormwater ordinances or stormwater utilities, and you know, in those instances, you know, they're essentially grandfathered, and you know, but if it's new construction, It's either needs to have a permit and maintain everything on site, or have the appropriate permits to have that discharge into the canal. That's,
Part of the exemption is keeping the stormwater on their property. And they're discharging it into the canal. I mean, you can't get around that one.
You're getting off, is this?
I know, a little
okay.
bit, but that's why I wanted to know who owns the water.
Thank you, Tim.
So, on to discuss review triggers for a special event permit as set forth in the code. I want to make just one comment before we get into this. When we first started doing this, 1998, this was 2 pages. And then 2000, 3 pages. 2012, it went to 8 pages. And in 2016, it went to 13, but that's because a lot of the stuff was crossed out but still left in there. I want to go back to 2 pages.
How about 1? Let's go to 1 page. Do I hear 1?
I mean, it just seems like it just gets more convoluted. Especially if I pulled,
2016, we made a great attempt to streamline the ordinance, but it's still, as soon as, with all due respect, Mr. Herron, you give it to an attorney and it, one sentence becomes 50.
that's right.
So, this is kind of my issue, because I brought this up about what triggers the necessity of a special event permit. And it seems to me what triggers the necessity for the town to issue a special event permit should be public safety. Does it require parking? Are there 5,000 guests? But if 2 people are getting married at Joanne's house, that shouldn't necessitate a special event permit. If the Times Square merchants are coming to my house to talk about what color pavers to choose, that shouldn't facilitate or necessitate a special event permit.
Why would that?
Well, I'm just bringing up silly examples. Maybe it's the number of attendees that facilitates, or I keep saying facilitating, necessitates the permit, because at 100 people someplace, there are public safety issues. But why else do we issue a special event permit?
Well, I know we have to if there's going to be alcohol.
Okay, let's
then-
put that on the list,
and-
alcohol.
And if there's going to be amplified noise, because you got to let the people know.
These are public events. These aren't, they could be alcohol at my house, and I don't need a special event permit. I could have amplified noise at my house. I don't need a special event
And if
permit.
it's not authorized by the certificate of use, one that came up recently was not authorized by the certificate of use. Don't forget, there's that on page 157,
There's, and
22-1.
Waiver of the alcohol, outdoor alcohol stuff.
that's just a waiver. That's not a special event. That's a waiver of the ordinance.
Waiver, but
But the special event, if you're going to have like cars that are going to be blocking too many cars there and people, that's a special event.
closing the road.
Closing the road.
Because those are public safety issues. The certificate of use is a good point.
Right.
But those, what you're
The
saying
the
are
one,
safety
the one group
issues.
that I'm thinking of met at someplace that didn't have the certificate of use. Now, their next meeting, I know, is going to be held at a restaurant that has alcohol service. And they
It's no
have the
lo- it's not a
parking,
special
it's
event.
not over the capacity, it's just whatever. So that's not a special event.
So when our first ordinance that was passed, it was simple. It said a special event is any social, commercial, or fraternal gathering, the purpose of being entertained, instructed, viewing, a competition, or any other reason that would bring them together in one location that normally would not include a concentration of population. Specifically excluded from this ordinance are any gatherings formed and/or sponsored by a recognized religion or religious society. But then it talked about the permit required. And I think it got all crazy when they tried to put in for the recurring events, and then I think it was Marilyn Miller's, that's when it went to 8 pages. Look at the
No,
definition here.
I'd like to suggest that we review the very first ordinance and see why it doesn't serve us. And perhaps we can go back to that
Well-
and move on from this.
The first one, or the second one, because right after that, you guys.
Whichever.
But what we asked was for you to make a specific thing about a particular thing that you want to change,
I've
not to
just told you.
rewrite the whole thing.
I am my whole issue was, what is the threshold that requires someone to come into the town of Fort Myers Beach to ask for a special event permit?
So do you have a problem with section 22.6 on page 158 that lists it, general criteria and limitations? It's pretty succinct, I think.
Well, it also says special event. Any activity conducted on public or private property that will or has the potential to substantially affect the ordinary and customary use of beaches, public streets, rights-of-way, sidewalks, and other public forums, including any temporary activity conducted or on private property that is not authorized by the certificate of use or certificate of occupancy issued for any business operating on the property where the activity is planned, or any temporary activity conducted on private property where the area of the activity coincides with parking spaces required for the operation of any business. So that would be public safety, because it talks about parking.
Right, and in all honesty, page 158 is the whole criteria. Everything else is just how you apply. That's enforcement. I mean, to me, there's not that much to change. Everything else is just how the town gets to do its job when you do apply, which has to be defined. So I see that it's actually a rather short ordinance in terms of the general criteria and limitations there. It's a page.
I agree.
So if a neighborhood has a homeowners association meeting and they have 100 people show up, is that a special event?
They walk in to your
Some of them are going to drive, some of them are going to walk. We didn't require them to
Roger.
do one way or the other.
I don't think it's a special event.
Are you selling tickets? Are you selling alcohol
Nope.
at the house
But
to raise
parking-
money?
Nope.
But parking, yeah, so, yeah, that, you're right, because you're doing it, you're not doing it to, for an event.
Fundraiser, it's
It's
not
a meeting, you're having a meeting.
We're having a meeting, or we could be having a picnic, or we could be having a celebration, or
And it's
we
occurring
could
in
be
your own
having
neighborhood.
a public meeting for Roger to come and speak to the homeowners association.
And that's your neighborhood. It's zoned as a single-family neighborhood. It's a meeting with regard to your single-family neighborhood. It's not a business function. You're not
Yeah,
fundraising, you're not selling tickets, you're not selling alcohol. It's not a special event. But if you block the road, you could get tickets. So everybody in the neighborhood has to be nice about how they park. And if you're having one that large, what we've done in the past is you call and say, oh, by the way, we're having our neighborhood meeting, if, this time, whatever. If there is a problem, the meeting's at this house, let us know. Everybody is going to make an effort to be off the road and be appropriate with those who have to park. We'll try to park within the parking limits.
and when my kids were little, we always called all our neighbors across the canal and down the street and said, hey, we're having a birthday party for Joey, we're having one for Lexi, just so you know. Sometimes just being courteous and letting your neighbors know.
Oh, we send out emails to everybody, so.
Yeah, so that's different than that's different than like a business throwing a big special event and not getting a, certificate of use, or, I'm sorry, special event permit for it. Roger, are you clear on the special event permit, or do you think it needs to be fixed?
Well, I think that, other than the one event that I know of, we haven't had anyone complain of how we were applying this law, except for one individual who literally told us about it, midway through the day, noon for an event that was happening that evening. We offered them a quick cure, which they followed through and did, and it was resolved,
Roger?
with the exception that they couldn't bring in alcohol.
Roger, is it true, I was told by someone, I'm taking it, is it true that if I were to host a wedding in my home, it would be a special event?
I haven't seen one special event permit that said that. I've seen them for people who've had them on the beach that have had
Right,
special
'cause
event
if you've
permits, but I haven't seen one in
in the
someone's
EC.
home. Maybe it's occurred, but I sign them all, so it hasn't crossed my desk in the 2 years I've been here.
Okay, I can move on from this.
I was just going to say, if anyone has any specific word changes
Then we
to
can come to
page 158, please let us
What
know.
are they?
Thank you.
Strategic plan update and,
I think they can go quick, though.
monthly reports.
But Anita, I know she has to leave. These will go quick, right?
Only if you have any
That's up to
questions.
you.
Nothing ever goes quick.
Okay, so discuss quarterly strategic plan update. Let's see how it goes. We might, does anybody have any questions on these? I've read the whole thing. The short-term rental operating plan, I think, is going great. Any questions on that? Bruce, you brought that up before. That's why it's on here. Do you have any problems with the way it's working? Nope. Hey, is the phone number online now?
My understanding is it is, but I will personally verify that later.
Okay.
Did we get the list so that people can access online? I know I tried.
I know,
last
I
week
know
and-
that was done. I don't know the frequency it's being updated. I'll have to check with Michelle and Robert. But I know we had an initial list online.
Need any questions for the short term?
No.
Joanne? No? Okay, the International Property Maintenance Code adoption.
Are you going through this item by item?
I'm just on the where it says background. I'm just asking if anybody has any questions on these.
Nope.
Oh, you know what? Roger, I know it's a long day, so the IPMC adoption, if the council wants, we can move that to the next one, because that's the chapter 6.
And maybe you can prepare something in advance because you're the one,
Right.
this is your item.
So do you guys want to
Maybe
move
you
this
can work
on?
with Jason.
Because it'll
and-
take a while.
And bring forward any questions on this one.
Okay. Can we move it to the next M&P then?
Absolutely, but I will further suggest that.
I can get with Jason between.
Yeah, if there are any proposed word changes, it'd be easier to have those as part of the kit.
I will give Jason everything this week.
Okay.
The strategic plan quarterly update, any questions on that? Bruce, you had questions about the coloring coding. Are you good with how it's being brought
Yeah,
forward now?
I see a lot less green, which means it's more accurate to me.
Okay, I know that was your. Anita, are you okay if we go on to the next one?
I'm beyond good with it.
Okay, discuss monthly reports from community
You know
development.
what, before we skip off of that, I just want to say thank you to you, Roger, and to all the staff who've really worked hard. We had a very aggressive strategic plan that we set up. And basically, it went through this March, let's just, whatever, for sure. And when you look at what we've accomplished, I'm very pleased. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, and I know the staff appreciates it as well.
Okay, monthly reports. Does anybody have any questions for community development? Oh. Community development's first on my list.
You can't always be first.
Is the Segway Tours, is that part of community development?
Roger? Bruce wants to know if Segway Tours is part of community development.
Segway tours?
That might be more public, what's the question on it? Is it like zoning or is it?
From Robert Bogart.
That's community development.
Yeah.
Yep. Where is
So-
Robert?
Try to track him down. Can someone try to track Bogart down, please?
I was just curious what the base issued warning was for Segway Tours.
Oh, okay. I assume that there was some aspect of the code that they weren't meeting, but we can find out the specific thing.
Else that we can get to while you're waiting on Robert?
Okay. Is environmental under that one then?
Yes.
Okay, just a quick comment, page 190, the fertilizer and glyphosate. I understand, and maybe the attorney will be able to fill us in, that the state did pass the Farm Bill, which means that we probably can't do anything with glyphosate, and we can not spend time on that. Remember, we talked about the fertilizer ordinance and separating it out from glyphosate. So I just mentioned that in passing, because if that Farm Bill passed, we won't be discussing it.
And I'm paraphrasing, but I can look it up real quick if need be. When other jurisdictions started considering adopting regulations that would either restrict, prohibit, or otherwise affect fertilizers and yard maintenance, things of that nature. A group of industry representatives went to Tallahassee, lobbied the legislature, and ultimately the legislature did what the legislature does a lot recently, which is preempt local government home rule powers by saying that unless an ordinance was adopted prior to, I think it's 2014, no local government can adopt any ordinance that regulates fertilizers from that point forward. It's preempted to the state.
So can we
That's the
even change
entire-
our fertilizer ordinance, or do we have to leave it? I guess we need to know, can we still talk about changes to the fertilizer ordinance? Because I know we can't do glyphosate right now.
Only if it predates,
No, she's talking about changing it today.
Because it's on the docket for us to.
That's what I
to-
brought up this morning, but.
to
I
amend.
think John needs to look at the proposed
you.
changes relative to the state law, and at that time, we will give you information as to whether a committee recommended changes can or cannot be implemented.
I-
And that's the point I'm making, because I don't want anybody to waste time on things we can't do.
is
Well,
it,
if it was adopted in 2014, we've just been wasting 5 years.
and again, I'm paraphrasing, there's, if the ordinance was adopted prior to the preemption date,
Yeah.
then it's
We were
grandfathered.
2008 or 2010 or something. I was
Okay.
on Murph, it was a long time
After
ago.
that, the ability to modify it or substantially modify it to increase additional prohibitions is severely restricted, if not preempted to the state.
Good thing we got it.
So we got what we got, maybe.
Okay.
Thank you, you'll get an
So
answer for
it's
us.
the same, it's the same situation with short-term rentals. So
You
what
just
the
email us
legislature
all
did.
the information?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Madam
you.
Mayor?
Yes.
Going back to Councilor Butcher's question, the reason they got a warning was they were going through Times Square.
Ah, I'm glad you warned them.
Is that all you got for, anybody got community development questions?
But I got an environmental one. Is that community
Yes,
development?
it is.
Okay, it says dredging. The latest monitoring report for the northern section of the island is also attached for review. I actually couldn't find that, but I was just wondering what that meant. Is that meaning that the Coast Guard is gonna, or whoever the Coast Guard goes to dredge that canal? Is that what we're talking about? The one that goes around Bowditch or Bowditch?
Federal Canal, WC.
Yeah.
First, I think I misunderstood your question.
Okay, and the report says dredging.
Yeah.
The latest monitoring report for the northern section of the island is also attached for review, that presumably has to do with dredging, and it says the lead time for dredging is 3 years. So I didn't know what the importance was of this paragraph here.
Like why they're telling us?
Yeah.
I believe, and I'm going from,
Can't let him, he's telling us.
I believe going from memory was, you may have received a request from someone to add Renera sand in a particular area, and I think they were trying to explain why that couldn't occur.
Oh, is that Leonardo, down towards the south end?
So dredging
My
spoils,
recollection.
not the dredging, active dredging, but the receipt of dredging spoils. Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yes, I believe that's the issue at hand.
Because that's a federal canal, and the Coast Guard and everybody, they keep it open. That doesn't relate to the town. They're going to keep that channel open.
I didn't ask you, did you?
Right. No, I know, but I was looking at you because
Oh,
you know this stuff.
okay, I know.
That's why I was looking at you.
Anything else? You know, it's funny that you just said that, Joanne, about the glyphosate, because it's on here, it's on the report too.
But that's why I
Yeah.
asked.
The next one is,
Sorry, I got one other
that's why
one.
we're here, Bruce.
I was just trying to find it. I just thought it was interesting how many permits were issued recently. I thought it was 400. And last year, it was like 250 a month. I think in the month of December, it said 400. I just thought that was really interesting.
Good, though.
Here it is, yeah, 408, oh, no, I'm sorry. That was October to December, it was 408. I was thinking that was a monthly number, so, never mind. Forget
Oh,
that.
man.
So it's 1, 2, 3, yeah. It's in the same neighborhood. It's actually less.
I will say that under community development, I attended the special magistrate hearing with the new special magistrate and the new town attorney. I don't know if any of you guys watched, or, I know Dennis popped in for a little bit, but she is amazing. She doesn't put up with crap from either side. And she's like Judge Judy, man. People will come watch her just because she's like Judge. She was telling people, I done. I mean, she was great.
I got positive feedback on it.
I'd have to tend to agree.
She was amazing, wasn't she?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
and I'll email this out to you all, but in case you were wondering. Florida Statute Section 576.181, subsection 5A. Except as otherwise provided in paragraph B, the department, which is the Department of Environmental Protection, has exclusive authority to regulate the sale, composition, packaging, labeling, wholesale and retail distribution, and formulation, including nutrient content level and release rates of fertilizer. This subsection expressly preempts such regulation of fertilizer to the state. An ordinance regulating the sale of fertilizer adopted by a county or municipal government before July 1st, 2011 is exempt from this subsection, and the county or municipal government may enforce such ordinance within its respective jurisdiction. And the way that I have understood and interpreted that similar language is, because I've been asked in other jurisdictions related to vacation rentals, is that whatever was in effect in 2011 is what we can enforce.
Can't do anything else.
Not just sale and use, that implied
Sale, use,
Okay,
composition,
good,
labeling.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you're here because for 5 years we've been working on this and nobody had brought this to anybody's attention.
I certainly will talk to staff and get their viewpoint so we can make sure that we're all on the same page.
Thank you.
Okay, any other community development? Okay, Cultural Resources Departmental Report. Anything?
No.
I just want to say, I think everybody, Allison, you're great.
Thank you for stepping up on Mound House, and it was a great visioning and all that good stuff. Thank you.
Bruce, are you good with that? Okay, Parks and Rec Department, again, Allison. We love you. Is anything for Parks and Rec?
Thanks for stepping up.
And again, I mentioned earlier that you guys are getting the dugout fixed for Little League, so anybody who's worried about the dugout roof, it should be fixed. Public Works Department report, any questions on that? Nope. Normally Bruce has something.
Nope.
Nope. I have one question. Is the sign going to go up soon?
One.
The one on Primo?
As soon as the locates come back.
What is
Just
it?
have, oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, you ordered it, though?
It's here.
The sign is here?
We got it today.
What is
What
a
is the
locate?
sign mill?
For
Part,
parking?
What is the sign mill?
the sign, no standing, or no,
The no parking sign by
Yeah,
the
it's a no
doghouse.
parking
They're
sign.
they're trying to get rid of
Spelled
all of
correctly
them
this
and make
time?
something
Yeah.
that works.
grammar checked it first. We're good.
Oh, yeah.
Siri told us wrong the first time.
Okay.
And I do have one question, sorry. Packet page 251, there's a picture, it says Bay Road Loading Zone. I took a picture yesterday, over the weekend, for when I left the library, and people are still sitting on plastic lawn chairs along there waiting for the tram that they brought with them. So have we had more discussion? We mentioned it to Lee County when they've been here. Is that something that you and Roger can
I'll
continue to
reach out to
discuss?
Lee Tran.
And ask when they're going to get a bench there?
Well, so isn't that our road? Can we put benches in?
I don't know, but the
can
council has
probably,
said
but
we'd like
it's
a bench
retrans.
there rather than people with
Let them
plastic
pay for
beach
it.
chairs.
Okay.
So a couple of things. One is, I want to make sure we call the attention, those 4 bullet points at the beginning of the Public Works report.
Yes.
One of them deals with Bay Road, and that is converting the loading zone to paid parking spots. So that's something council would like to see us do. That's the second bullet.
Wait a minute.
It's on page 247.
I
Top of
don't
the
remember reading
page.
that.
For us to consider.
I did have questions there. Yeah.
Convert Bay Road loading zone to six,
That's a picture on 251.
but don't they need it to unload the trolley? And for like the people who are at Seagrave, they unload and load their businesses there? Why would we park cars there? That seems like if there's school buses go by there. I would not want to put permanent parking there.
So the information that I had is that for purposes of loading, meaning true commercial loading and unloading, that we would permit that, but if it's just people parking there, the question is, you want to just leave it open, catch as catch can parking, or set it up as paid parking when it's not being used as a loading zone?
My personal opinion there would be, it's a civic area, and kids and stuff, I wouldn't want to bring people in there to park on the side of the road, right by the sidewalk where kids are going back and forth to school, and school buses and riding their bikes. I don't know.
Well,
And that's where the tram loads, yeah.
That's where we put a trams.
I
Or
would
is that,
not,
or is that beyond where the tram is?
no, that's the tram.
Chelsea, who typically uses that parking, do you know?
I believe Christy could probably speak better to this, being that her office was down there at one point. I believe the merchants of that plaza park and either park there or unload, but we've kept an eye on it lately and feel that its use could be better served as paid parking.
Put this up on the screen so we all know what we're talking about.
Christy Corey. I got a ticket one time for parking back there.
Why?
Because it's a loading zone only. So I did get a ticket because I parked in the back of the office. But for the most part, the restaurants use it for loading and unloading. Now, that could have changed in the last 5 or 6 years.
Talking about on there.
Built on the side of the building that like
He wants you to
faces the
touch it,
school.
Chris.
Well, there's
Sure.
two buildings. Which building is it?
It's a small front building
It's
on the
like
left.
right across the street, right across the street from the library, Bruce.
Yeah, that's where the trolley is.
Right.
Yeah, why would you put
Yeah.
paid
The
parking?
the trolley stop, I believe, is up here further.
No,
No,
No, they stop right
directly in the
there.
middle of that building.
that's right, right there.
I'm not for putting paid parking spots there. Like I said,
it
children
as
are
a
there
loading
all the
zone.
time.
Okay.
We're
Leave
still
it as a
talking, and we're
loading
still
zone. Let's
talking
move
about
on.
that heart of the island and designing all that. I would not do that at this time.
No worries, let us
Okay.
know if you
Thank
change your
you.
minds.
Thank you.
Good creative thinking, though.
I would like to comment on the entrance sign to the island, and yes, I'd like it to match town hall branding / beach access branding.
You know, what about the one at the south end? Because when I came back from Naples the other day, it's a beautiful coming off the south end, that welcome to Fort Myers Beach. I mean, are we going to have all three match or use,
Yes.
okay.
And is that the branding we want? That was part of the whole idea. I thought a while back, we were talking about the branding. Do we want beach balls? Do we want palm trees?
want
Do we
elegance a little
hammocks?
bit.
Do we want tarpon jumping? What's that?
I said, I kind of want it to be elegant. I don't want to look like a junky town.
Well, yeah,
All right, how
fine.
about if we
Let 'em-
bring you the rendering of the sign,
That's a good idea.
and you guys can let us know if you like it or not?
Then, wait a minute, mid-January, what kind of supposed to sidewalk? Oh, what we have here, Chelsea, it says the sidewalk along Ikeda Times Square will commence postseason. And then the question comes to mind, the racetrack, to use somebody's term.
Can we stop calling it that, please?
I love it.
What do you want to call it?
No,
Circle?
it's really negative.
Well,
It's our entry
it looks like a
feature.
racetrack.
It's already there.
Yeah,
Transportation
well,
and entry
that's a
feature.
real darn shame.
I agree.
We shouldn't perpetrate it.
You're right, I agree. All right,
I'm
let's
going.
call it the Lee County Enhancement to Seafarers Traffic Flow.
Okay.
Must spell-
How about
That
we
must
call it
spell
the
something.
entrance
Wait
to
a
the
minute, it
town?
spells racetrack. No, I'm
Wait,
teasing.
okay, the property you're talking about, what's the question?
The sidewalks. The sidewalks that we know today will not be there when that happens, if it does happen, and I assume it's going to happen in some fashion. So should we be replacing all of our sidewalks?
Well, we're
What
getting
do we
queued
do?
up, and before we start, we'll let you know and see where we are relative to the traffic flow enhancement being proposed by Lee County, and see
Sidewalks,
if,
yep.
at that point, you still want to go forward with the sidewalk project.
And make sure, look at the FDOT thing that he's going to send, that's on that flash drive I just got.
Now, you also want to know if we want you to submit the digging marginal dock at Bayfront grant application? Yes, I do. Anybody else?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And then you also wanted
Did you
to
say
know,
no?
No, I said not, yeah.
Oh,
And then you also asked if we're going to pursue the mooring field expansion to the north side of the Matanzas Pass Bridge?
Yes.
Yeah, the AAC, I got some negative feedback from them, but does the town and community development and everybody, or Public Works, and everybody think that it's a wise thing to do overall?
We believe the mooring field is turning into a destination, and it would enhance the field even more.
I'm not a fan, but I'll go along with my counsel. And he's not done. You still got questions?
No, no, I'm fine.
God, you're like my kids. Okay, no more for Public Works, right?
Right.
Water Utility Department?
I got tons of questions, Christie. Come on.
No, I said stop.
Thank you, Chelsea.
I'm only kidding.
Oh, jeez.
But thank you for the good job you do.
Thank you,
You guys are great in that water department.
thank you.
Everybody loves the Water Department. I think one of the best things Roger did was take you out of Public Works and give you your own place. Financial report?
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bruce has a question.
So I'm concerned about Estrelita. And, boy, I'd really like to know who that was that denied that. But I guess we probably shouldn't talk about it here. But
Probably not.
we have a couple of vacant lots there. Did anybody talk to the people that own the vacant lots? Would those be potentials?
That might just come up.
Yeah, you guys
Tim.
got us talking to them like, I know it's getting late, but we got to stay on procedure.
Tim Vanderwalker with Tetra Tech. We've spoken with one property owner that has an outfall located on his property. The inlet and the pipe are all within his private property, so there's nothing within the town right-of-way. He was not against it completely, but not wholeheartedly for it, I guess would be the good way to put it. Just in terms of the proposed solution of a complete stormwater system down Estrelita that outfalls through his property, he wasn't 100% on board for. Not to say that the door is completely closed, but in speaking with him as the engineer, he understands where we're coming from, but it may be more suited for members of staff or potentially council to approach him to finalize more. And as engineers, we don't really have the position to negotiate or offer anything. It's more in terms of an engineering perspective that we can approach him. So I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't say that it's completely closed, but the potential is there.
So if you go all the way down to Amberjack, does that create significant engineering challenges?
So we would put in the system along Estrelita and make that connection there at Amberjack. I don't believe it would be. We would treat that as a joint outfall with the county.
That's the county owns Amberjack, so.
Correct, the county has the ownership of Amberjack. So we haven't received any numbers from the county yet as far as flows that are going to come from the Estero system. So we're still in that preliminary phase of figuring out what's feasible or not in terms of pipe sizes and flows. But as far as providing relief for Estrelita, whether we outfall at the end of Estrelita or at Amberjack, it's basically one and the same.
Now, with the end of Amberjack, though, is that considered bay or beach? I always thought that was more of a beach because we're not supposed to put stormwater onto beach.
The Amberjack is on the bay side of the
You
bridge.
consider that the bay? Because
would
we walk
consider that.
underneath there and you can still.
No, right, but I would consider that bay.
Does this put, Lee County has said along the way, and as have you've said we've been able to keep 30 inches or smaller pipe size. Are you concerned now that we're going to get into a whole other level here?
If it's a joint outfall, that's what the town is held to, is the 30 inches, and we would verify that that is feasible at the 30 inches. If it's not, then we would have to look at other approaches.
The right-of-way down there is 90 feet.
Yeah,
It's the biggest right-of-way on the island.
yeah, it's big.
And, but if they had another outfall a quarter mile up the road, it may not be a problem, but I understand they're struggling to find other
Right.
outfalls down
I
there.
mean, the potential is there that the town could have their own outfall and the county could have their own outfall. We would just need to work with the county through that process for them to either put it in themselves or give the town the permit to put it in, or the easement, or whatever that documentation needs to be.
Questions? Anita? Dennis?
Just one real quick. Bruce,
Don't have any questions.
can I just clarify real quick so when I talk to Tetra Tech, I can be clear? What are your concerns exactly with the outfall on Esterly? Are you concerned that further down it's still going to have flooding issues if we go amberjack?
No, because I assume the engineers will figure it out and remove the pond. You know, as you go to Escalator and do that right turn, that pond's really big.
Okay,
And my concern was just extra costs for the project.
okay.
If you have to go down to amberjack, does that create
Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
problems? You know?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, financial report. No. Stop it.
I brought up my question earlier today.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Lang?
Thank you.
Thanks for keeping our accounts full.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Wait,
Oh,
I'm
wait.
not done. Would you stop?
That was the last one.
No.
Madam Mayor, just we have an answer from the fire district.
Yes.
They say according to their codes, so don't laugh too loud, the roadway width clearance width should be 20 feet wide and 13.6 high. Clearly, that's a challenge for us here.
I knew it was 20 feet because that's what they said years
Can't
ago.
get down any road.
Right, so, so I'm relying on and it may be wrongly so, but I'm relying on the conversation I had with the past position with the fire chief that said that, if we have 14 feet, we can kind of squeeze through. That's why I'm.
Right,
planning
But
on-
who
but
just
to me,
told you
when
20?
it says 20-foot roadway width, that means the width of the road, that doesn't mean their clearance in the road. That's the way I read that.
Says access roads, I don't know if that, and it says it says they'll have an obstructed width of not less than 20 feet,
Obstructed width of
or
lot.
unobstructed width of not less than
I
20.
remember that from the Times Square conversation.
I still think that means roadway.
Unobstructed roadway.
Well, that's, when you go down Estero Boulevard and you don't have a center turn lane and there's cars on both sides of the road, I don't think there's 20 feet clearance.
There's not, but I'm telling you, that's what
Well,
you just
I'm
said.
just saying, let's apply some logic to it. The road width is only 10, 11, 12 feet, depends on where you're at.
He's just the messenger telling us what
I understand, I'm just saying that doesn't ring true to me. It doesn't seem logical that if you have cars on the road, that you're gonna expect to have 20-foot clearance.
TPIMP update.
So, as you know, before the litigation was initiated, and we thought the TPI project was going to be aggressively moving forward, we had asked TPI to provide the council, and by virtue of providing to the council, being part of public documentation to the public, status of where they are with their project, and true to their commitment, they're continuing to do that.
Questions on that? Anybody? No. Okay. That's that, and now we just have agenda management, Dennis.
Can I just?
Go ahead.
Okay, so number 275, review fertilizer ordinance. That one looks like maybe you're just going to come back with that. Mr.
Right,
Hare?
right, we'll take the draft that was shared with you, Mr. Hearn and I will review it and see if any of the proposed changes can be accomplished in light of the state statute.
And then the other one, the turtle lighting educational session. I'm concerned about how late it is in March, because we want to hit as many people as we can, but as long as it's no later than that, it would have been better to have it, you know, a couple of weeks earlier. We do want to hit height of season. I know we were trying to get the truck from, is that from FDEP or Fish and Wildlife or whatever, to show the lighting.
Yeah, I think it was a coordination issue with available parties, was the result of that being the date.
It is, thank you.
Do we need to add the chapter 6 stuff to this, or do you want me to just give it to Jason? I mean, because we're going to bring it back, we decided to skip over it.
Michelle takes your notes from today, things you said, add to the MMP, she adds them to the MMP.
But will it go to the MMP, or will it not go to a first reading?
I think we better off bringing it back to the
To
MMP.
the very next, so can we put it to the next MMP, please? Since we
We'll do
skipped-
the best we can.
Because if not, then I want to talk about it today, since it's here. I don't want it to keep going.
Well, you're the chair, you can talk about anything you want to. Clearly, our goal would be to try, the reason we give you these documents as they are, so that as you review the agenda, you could say, I don't like this may, I want to change it to shall, or I want to delete E and add an F and whatever. So to the extent that, we have that conversation with you and see what wants to be added in and deleted or modified, then we could put it back on. It should be a quick conversation, I would think.
Okay, I'll get with Jason, and we'll get it on the next MMP. Is anything you guys want to add? Yes. Go ahead. Oh, we were going to add the noise to that, remember?
Those are the items Michelle will add as a result of your
Would you like me
comments.
to identify the items? We have a Lynn Hall special exception coming forward on March the 4th. The Wynn's parking agreement to a date uncertain. Remove the dinghy dock behind Tops. We'll report back February the 4th. And info on God's Table at the same meeting, February the 4th. Fines for contractors at an M&P to be determined. Review ordinance 15-01, M&P to be determined. The International Property Maintenance Code adoption, an M&P on February 7, 2019. And the Chapter 6 at the next M&P, which is February 7.
Say noise. Did I miss?
If I didn't say it, I should have.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah, review ordinance 1501. That's the.
1501,
Yeah.
thank you.
And that's 2-7 probably as well.
Meeting with the sheriff?
Meeting with the sheriff, we'll add that on, and then we'll have to,
I'll contact him and
I can call him when I leave here.
If you're going to contact him, thank you.
Then remove families from short-term rental
The
ordinance.
other attorneys were looking at, they were going to send a letter to the Attorney General to see if we could. So I guess what Bruce is saying, let's put it on the agenda so we don't forget.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Family definition versus occupancy.
If we're allowed to.
Talk to the town attorney about that.
And, okay, good.
Anything else? Anita or Dennis?
Nope.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, go to neighbors now. Gary, you can make it to Lover's Key.
I guess 4:57.
You did not.
I did so too.
Bing.